123. The blind Taoist held the peachwood sword and pointed it at the ghost in the wedding dress. Are you a demon or a ghost? The ghost in the bright red wedding dress gently twisted the umbrella handle and stood alone on the mountain road in the distance, giving people a sense of loneliness. Along the way, the hem of her dress was already muddy. Somehow, she didn't use any magic. Instead, she condensed the invisible miasma of the mountains into clothes that didn't get stained with dirt. The bright red wedding dress on her was obviously made of real silk and satin. It might even be the work of a tailor in a shop at the foot of the mountain. The ghost first went down and peeled off the skin on her face. Then, she slowly raised her palm and covered a pale and colorless face. She was young and beautiful like those unmarried girls at the foot of the mountain. If it weren't for her sickly face, she would be no different from an ordinary girl. Even the blind Taoist couldn't feel the demon aura on her when she was so close to him. This kind of big demon who cultivated Taoism could walk in the cities of the human world without hindrance. As long as they didn't approach the city god pavilion or the civil and martial temples, they wouldn't be suppressed by the secular forces. Of course, the premise was that this kind of big demon was willing to restrain their aura and suppress their murderous nature so that they wouldn't harm the world. The ghost twitched the corner of her mouth, but her lips still didn't move. Taoist priest, you are dedicated to killing demons and accumulating immeasurable merits, so I came. I'm looking forward to your so-called Five Thunders righteous method. The old Taoist was more and more shocked. The inside and outside of the upside-down plate in his sleeve had a total of 4 layers. They were aimed at demons, spirits, ghosts, and the gods of mountains and rivers respectively. It was spinning crazily. Except for the first layer of spirits, the other 3 layers were all spinning and shaking violently. It meant that this thing in front of him had a complicated identity. It was very likely that it was a big demon who cultivated Taoism before it died. After it died, it became a fierce ghost. However, before it completely fell into the evil path, it already had the qualification to be promoted to the gods of mountains and rivers. The blind Taoist was complaining in his mind. Compared to the treacherous mountain ghost in the 3 Branches Mountain, this one was much more difficult to deal with. The old Taoist tried his best to keep a straight face and not let the female ghost notice his guilty conscience. He slowly put away the peachwood sword and held it upside down to show his goodwill. He laughed loudly and said, although this young lady has a majestic demonic aura and has the aura of being in charge of a region, what is commendable is that when I observe with my heart and eyes, there is very little murderous aura and not many sins on you. Even if there is some lingering resentment, it is the remnants of many years ago and is not worth mentioning. As an itinerant cultivator from the mountains, I can be considered to be half of the same kind as this young lady. I have offended the Dragon King Temple and disturbed your cultivation. I have sinned. The wedding dress ghost, who had been looking up at the umbrella, suddenly retracted her gaze. She stared at the wandering Taoist who was skilled in thunder spells. This time, she opened her mouth to speak. Miss, can't you see my clothes? Call me madam. The last few words were practically a roar from the woman's lips. In an instant, torrential rain poured down, and the mountain winds howled. Pa. The female ghost put away the umbrella. She held the umbrella in one hand and stroked the umbrella with the other, gently wiping away the rain. But when she looked at the master and disciples, her face was constantly distorted. You are indeed blind, old blind. You can observe with your heart and eyes, right? I will take you back to the mansion and let you, a wicked old Taoist, know what is the pain of having your heart pierced. The old Taoist tried to ease the atmosphere and sighed. Why do you have to be so aggressive, madam? It is not like there is no room for negotiation. The female ghost began to move forward slowly, step by step in the mud of the path. She held the umbrella in one hand and lifted her dress with the other, revealing a pair of wet and dirty embroidered shoes. She smiled and said, You are not good at Taoism, yet you dare to have evil intentions. It is good that you are dead. It is good that you are dead. Otherwise, you will delay Longjuan's study and his achievement in the imperial examinations. At the end of her speech, the female ghost murmured softly with a gentle look in her eyes. Those words that seemed to be whispering were completely covered up by the storm. The blind Taoist sneered and said, "Madam, do you really want to perish together with me?" The old Taoist saw that they were in a situation where they would fight to the death. After decades of traveling, he had visited half of the Aquarius continent. He was not a person who was afraid of trouble. He said softly, "Little cripple, as long as we can work together to defeat the enemy this time, I promise you that Xiao Jue will not have to hand in the talisman spring for a year." The crippled youth nodded and reached out to hold the spirit-summoning banner with the words "Subdue demons and ghosts, eliminate evil and defend Taoism." He said in a low voice, "It is done." The blind old man stomped heavily on the ground. He put 2 fingers together and made a Taoist sword gesture. He quickly recited a series of sword gestures and finally finished with the words "urgent as the law command." All of a sudden, the originally rolled-up surface of the spirit-summoning banner stuck in the ground fluttered in the wind. The 8 words on it turned pale white, like 8 soldiers in silver armor on the battlefield who began to listen to military orders. They began to run on the banner and arrange the soldiers into formations. Then the 4 words "Subdue demons and ghosts" moved along the banner, the wooden pole, the crippled youth's arms and shoulders. They moved rapidly and finally ran into the youth's ears and nose. The youth's eyes turned pure white. Every time he breathed, black smoke would curl around his 7 orifices. The crippled youth clenched his fists and roared to the sky. His whole body was covered in black smoke. The raindrops the size of soybeans evaporated into water vapor 3 feet above his head. Compared to the female ghost who had restrained her yin qi, the crippled youth was more like an otherworldly ghost who chose people to devour. The ghost in the bridal dress had been sizing up the round-faced girl. When the boy began to run towards her, she looked at the blind old Taoist who looked relieved. She said indifferently, "I'm so disappointed. You can't even be counted as a heterodox sect. You're just an unorthodox sect. A thief crying stop thief. You don't deserve to die. You deserve to suffer a fate worse than death." The crippled youth reached the ghost in the blink of an eye. He jumped high and swept his leg toward the latter's head. The ghost in the bridal dress did not evade or block. She held her dress with 2 fingers and moved forward in a straight line. There was a bang. The ghost's head was uprooted and flew down the mountain. The headless woman continued to move forward. After landing, the youth swept his leg again, but this time, it was aimed at the headless woman's waist. The hand that held the umbrella only used the back of her hand to lightly block the youth's powerful kick. The youth's kick did not move the back of the ghost's hand at all. With the help of the rebound force, the youth twisted his body in the air and pushed his palm toward the ghost in the bridal dress's heart. He said in a low voice, "Demon subduing." The silver characters appeared on the back of the youth's hand. Then, with each stroke, they broke up and gathered into a murderous silver short sword. It was covered in a green and white light. It flew out of his hand and aimed at the ghost's heart. The ghost pinched the sharp flying sword that was about to pierce through the red bridal dress with 2 fingers. The flying sword, which was less than a foot long, was shaking and buzzing. The ghost's voice sounded leisurely. "I don't care about the head, but the dress can't be damaged. If it's dirty, it can be cleaned. But if it's damaged, it won't be beautiful anymore. Otherwise, why would Langjun laugh at my needlework?" After the crippled youth's palm attack, his fist hooked upward almost at the same time. However, he did not yell out the words "ghost subduing." A flying sword made of runes on the banner flew out of his fist. Apparently, the youth was not really an idiot. It was a perfect match to kill the enemy. There was a loud roar. "Bitch ghost, I'll enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Even if I lose my head, I'll still strike you with lightning." A bolt of white lightning struck down from the sky about 30 meters above the ground. The ghost still held the umbrella in one hand. With the other hand, she pinched the first demon subduing flying sword with her index finger and thumb. Then, she raised her arm slightly and caught the second demon subduing flying sword with her ring finger and little finger. Then, she elbowed the youth's forehead lightly. The latter flew backward and fell on the muddy path. He slid back about 3 meters. The ghost raised the hand holding the umbrella and opened it gently with a snap. The white lightning struck the top of the umbrella and exploded brilliantly. The ghost standing under the umbrella increased the strength of her 4 fingers. The two flying swords were broken in the middle. They fell to the ground and turned into two puddles of silver liquid. Soon, they mixed with the mud. With a wave of her hand, the head flew back and landed on the neck again. Flesh and blood grew, and the head soon returned to normal. The ghost in the bridal dress raised her free arm and picked 1 or 2 strands of grass on her head. Again, the blind old Taoist's heart trembled. He knew he couldn't do it again. He was ready to die and let go of all his strength. After taking a deep breath, his face became dignified and covered with a pale yellow color. The old Taoist's foot left the ground. He clenched a fist on his abdomen and hammered it heavily. His other hand was facing the sky. His sleeve slipped down, revealing a red talisman on his arm. The old Taoist said in a low voice, "Sh for clouds and rain, he for thunder. The clouds are full of jewels, immortals show the way." The female ghost held the oil paper umbrella and the corners of her mouth twitched. She passed by the crippled young man who was seriously injured and couldn't get up. She felt that he was blocking her way, so she casually lifted her leg and kicked the young man down the mountain. The round-faced girl cut her palm and arm with a knife and smeared the blood on her face. Then, she charged at the ghost desperately. However, the little girl forgot that it was raining heavily. She didn't have the immortal skill of the blind old Taoist to keep the talisman's aura. When she rushed to the ghost in the bridal dress, her face was already clean. Only the rainwater was left. The blood had been washed away by the rain. The ghost casually slapped the little girl's cheek. The petite and thin body immediately flew into the air and flew out. Like the crippled youth, she disappeared in a flash. After that, with every step the ghost in red took, a white thunder as thick as a bucket fell on the surface of the umbrella. Electric sparks flew and the white thunder shattered. If someone were to look at the mountain from afar, they would see streaks of white snake-like lightning descending from the sky time and time again before splashing brilliantly between the mountains and forests. A continuous rain that could be withstood with a bamboo hat turned into a torrential rain without warning. It was really difficult to move forward. When Chen Pinggan suggested finding a place to hide from the rain, Lin Shuyi reached out to hold the bamboo hat so that it wouldn't be knocked askew by the rapid rain. He said in a low voice, "Something's wrong." Li Huai pulled Li Baoping's sleeve and shouted, "I'm a little scared." Li Baoping scolded, "Senior Yin spirit is a ghost, isn't it? Then what are you afraid of?" Li Huai's eyes lit up. "Oh, right." He turned around and scolded the white donkey behind Lin Shuyi. "Little white donkey, don't lose track of them." The donkey snorted. The yin spirit appeared beside Chen Pinggan and said in a hoarse voice, "There's a female ghost guarding the surrounding mountains and rivers. Now she's fighting with the old Daoist. If there's no accident, she'll definitely win. Her origin is unknown and her cultivation is not low. If it's any other place, I can capture her. But now, it's very dangerous." Yin Shen looked around cautiously and explained, "In the mountain and sea register, as long as the mountain and sea god has a name, they will have their own territory or territory. If they fight in their own territory, they will have a significant advantage in terms of time and place. Other than that, the imperial court didn't specify the mountains and rivers of the gods. Even if there are demons and ghosts with outstanding strength and all kinds of spirits that can stand out, it's harder than ascending to the heavens to have something like the Confucian school's palace, the Taoist sect's blessed land, or the military's ancient battlefield ruins. It's not just about having a strong cultivation, but also a great opportunity. But the heavenly axiom has never liked us otherworldly items. If we want to openly occupy a territory, it's no different from a secular dynasty's vassal towns. It's easier said than done." Li Huai muttered to himself timidly, "This senior yin spirit must have been a scholar when he was alive." Yin Shen's tone was solemn as he pointed at the mountain path beneath everyone's feet. "I have a piece of bad news. The female ghost who is leading the evil group here is no less than a mountain god. She might even be Granny He at the same time. She has been acting strangely from the start. Furthermore, the path beneath your feet has been cast by the female ghost since the beginning. You are now walking on the Yellow Springs road that she had secretly paved. I'm an otherworldly item, so I can enter and exit freely. But if I try to force you out of this road, I might hurt your bodies and souls." Lin Shuyi said indifferently, Senior Yin spirit, since you can't win against her and we can't leave, what should we do? The Yin spirit said in a low voice, let's wait for her to appear. Don't worry, I won't let you get hurt. He felt a little guilty. He regretted going against the flow of the Great Spirit. Although it would be beneficial to his cultivation in the future, and it could even be said that the benefits were immeasurable, the problem was that his cultivation had been reduced to only 70 to 80%. He had also fallen into the trap of the female ghost. Her target from the beginning was most likely Chen Pinggan and his group, and not the blind Taoist master and his 2 disciples. Those white lanterns that were a few miles long on the mountain path were just a diversion to lure him to find out what was going on. The Yin spirit had mixed feelings. The blind Taoist master's cultivation was not high, but his nonsense mouth was really vicious. The Yin spirit said, all of you, stand behind me. Soon, the Yin spirit stood at the front of the path. Chen Pinggan and Lin Shuyi stood at the back, one on the left and one on the right. Chen Pinggan had already replaced his hatchet with the auspicious symbol. Lin Shuyi's hands were hanging down, and there was a talisman in each of his sleeves. Li Baoping and Li Huai stood further behind. The white donkey at the back was a little irritable and restless. It stomped heavily on the ground, splashing mud. A female ghost in wedding dress holding an oil paper umbrella slowly walked over from the distance. She was holding the leg of the blind Taoist master. She finally stopped when she was several feet away from Chen Pinggan and his group. On the mountain path, lanterns were lit. Even behind Chen Pinggan was no exception. Red lights shone on everyone's faces. The female ghost casually threw the blind Taoist master between the 2 parties. With a very surprised expression, she stretched out her finger and pointed. She said, there are so many distinguished guests. 1, 2, 3. There are 3 scholars. Which one is the Confucian gentleman? My Lang Jun once vowed to be a virtuous gentleman in this life so that he could balance the scales for the people. I didn't expect that at such a young age, he would achieve my Longjuan's long-cherished wish. Chen Pinggan wanted to take a step forward, but Yin Shen shook his head and said in a low voice, don't rush. The female ghost tilted her head and looked left and right, sizing up the 3 little guys who were carrying small bookcases on their backs. Lang Jun used to say that only well-behaved scholars could be called scholars. So, whenever I miss Lang Jun who has not returned from his travels, I will ask people to invite some scholars who pass by here to visit my house. I will give them beautiful young maids, unique ancient books, and 1,000-year-old guqin. I like to hear their moving words of eternal love. In the world, only scholars with a full stomach can say those words of love so tenderly. The female ghost in wedding dress finally focused on Yin Shen. She smiled and said, Senior Yin Shen, you are really unlucky. If this happened a few years later, I wouldn't dare to show up in person this time. She talked to herself and lowered her head slightly. She covered her mouth and smiled coquettishly. It is indeed not good for a woman to show her face in public. But even under the illumination of the light, that face was still deathly pale and colorless. It was too creepy. Li Huai only poked his head out to take a look. He was so scared that his legs trembled. She smiled and asked, I haven't talked to anyone for too long. I can't help myself. You don't mind, do you? She remembered something and gently closed the umbrella. Almost at the same time, the heavy rain suddenly stopped. There was not a single drop of rain in the air. Lin Shuyi smiled and asked, Madam, what happened to those scholars who were invited to your house? She continued to walk forward, her smile gone. Them. In the end, I cut those scholars who violated the oath in half. After I helped stop the bleeding, I planted them in my garden. Because I want to know if the seed of learning that you mentioned will blossom in the soil. Will it bear fruit one day? But I was very disappointed. They only turned into skeletons. But maybe it's because those scholars can't be considered scholars, so your appearance makes me overjoyed. Lin Shuyi's face was livid. Li Baoping was so angry that her whole body trembled. Li Huai simply covered his ears with both hands. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I used to like scholars the most, but I hate unfaithful men the most. The ghost in the wedding dress slowly raised her head. Tears of blood flowed out of her eyes. The most infatuated love in the world had never been let down. The white paper lanterns hanging on both sides of the mountain road all slid down from the top. Blood finally covered the candles. In the end, I realized that there is no scholar in the world who is not a heartless man. The ghost's face was covered in blood. She threw away the umbrella that she and her husband used as a token of love. She covered her face with both hands. She tried hard to suppress the sobbing between her fingers. "Husband, I don't blame you. Please come back." 124. On both sides of the mountain path, white paper lanterns without branches hung in the air, swaying in the wind. They had long since become large red lanterns. Blood boiled like boiling water. The blood droplets that splattered everywhere constantly hit the lanterns, producing a terrifying crackling sound. The wedding dress ghost continued to sob, unwilling to put down her hands. She didn't care about the yin spirit at all. The yin spirit's mind moved slightly, and he used telepathy to tell Lin Shuyi to use the obstacle-breaking talisman when he had the chance. He would try his best to hold the ghost back. Once the road to the underworld was broken, he would take Chen Pingan and rush out of the mountain. He didn't need to care about the yin spirit. Remember not to walk on the mountain path under their feet. He wanted Chen Pingan to use the auspicious symbol to open a new path. After Lin Shuyi agreed, he tentatively asked if he needed to leave the saber auspicious talisman with him. The yin spirit shook his head, saying he couldn't pick it up at all. The sword chi was too heavy, and it was best used to open a path. The grass and trees were stained with the sword chi of the sun and moon. It was innately effective against otherworldly items. It was not good for the yin spirit to continue using ghost tricks. The wedding dress ghost wiped her hands, revealing a pale face without a trace of blood. She grinned. "First you came uninvited, then you left without saying goodbye. That's not what a gentleman does." The yin spirit's face blurred, like a candle melting quickly. Finally, it turned into a cloud of black smoke and rushed toward the wedding dress ghost. She raised her hand and waved her sleeves. Her sleeves spread out like a bird's wings, protecting her body. The female ghost was still knocked back 7 to 8 feet in an instant. The bright red lanterns along the way exploded one by one. The blood in the lanterns did not splatter onto the mountain. Instead, it flew towards the female ghost who was knocked back by the yin spirit like swallows returning to their nest. The situation was similar to the old Taoist's spirit summoning banner, which absorbed the essence of the otherworldly item's remaining soul. Lin Shuyi said in a low voice, "Get ready to follow behind me. Let's get out of this mountain path first. Chen Pingan, we have to cut a new path through the trees. The yin spirit wants you to use the auspicious symbol to open a path." Chen Pingan nodded and said, "I'll carry the old Taoist on my back. I can't just leave him to die." The blind Taoist was lying a dozen steps away, dying. Chen Pingan ran over and carried the poor old Daoist on his back before turning around. Lin Shuyi stood still. With 2 fingers, he took out a yellow paper talisman and began to chant in a low voice. It was the obstacle-breaking talisman, one of the mountain and river talismans. According to the explanation of the yin god, there were thousands of types of mountain and river talismans. It was one of the essential talisman for chi cultivators when they traveled to the mountains or rivers. It was to prevent the so-called ghost going around the wall that the common people talked about. In fact, it was because they were worried that they would fall deep into the mountain protection formation secretly set up by their peers. Or they were afraid that the mountain ghosts with profound Taoism would play tricks on them. This was especially true when they entered the ruins of ancient battlefields and mass graves. If ordinary cultivators did not have a few obstacle-breaking talismans, yang qi lighting talismans, and 3 purity tranquility talismans, they would simply be walking into a trap. Lin Shuyi suddenly opened his eyes. In the depths of the youth's eyes, there was a flash of golden light. He said in a deep voice, "Let's follow the talisman." The obstacle-breaking talisman between the youth's fingers floated away. After it was suspended in the air, it began to wobble, like a drunkard trying to find his way. The talisman came to the side of the road near the mountain wall and stopped. Li Huai asked, "Are we going to crash into it?" Lin Shuyi took the lead and stepped forward. His figure suddenly disappeared. Li Baoping and Li Huai walked in one after another. Chen Pinggan carried the old daoist on his back and led the donkey, disappearing on the mountain road. The yellow paper talisman originally wanted to follow in, but it seemed to be quietly pulled by someone. Its aura faded and it fell to the ground. A group of people appeared in the depths of a dense forest. They looked at each other. Even Lin Shuyi, who used the obstacle-breaking talisman, was at a loss. Chen Pinggan first asked Lin Shuyi to help carry the old daoist. He began to climb the tree. At the highest point, they seemed to be in a valley surrounded by mountains on three sides. Even with Chen Pinggan's eyesight, he could not see clearly. He only had a vague outline. Before leaving the mountain road, far away from the mountain road, the yin spirit and the bridal dress ghost were fighting fiercely. The sound of lanterns bursting was endless. After leaving the mountain road with the help of the obstacle-breaking talisman, everything was silent. There was no sound. The huge difference did not make Li Huai feel at ease. Instead, it made him even more frightened. Chen Pinggan took a deep breath. He held the auspicious symbol saber in his hand. No matter what, go south. Only there is no mountain blocking us. In a valley with towering ancient trees, there were rows upon rows of tall buildings. The mansion was splendid. Its standard was even better than that of a general or a minister in the mortal world. Perhaps only the county king's mansion could compare. This mansion had a golden plaque with the words Xiu Shui Gao Feng hanging high. The strokes were vigorous, as if written by an immortal. On both sides of the gate stood a pair of huge stone lions. They were as tall as two people. One of the lions stretched out its claws and pressed down on a life-sized stone sculpture of a child. An old man in a green robe walked out with a big red lantern. The air rippled and the old man walked out. It was the doctor of the Dali Bureau of Rites. The old man sighed and frowned. Apparently, he felt that this visit would be very troublesome. He inserted the lantern under the feet of a stone lion. Almost in an instant, the originally gloomy and deserted mansion lit up. Thousands of lanterns in the mansion were lit up at the same time. Countless doors were pushed open, and out walked delicate and pretty women, old stewards, coachmen, cooks, maids, and guards. There were no less than 100 people, and they seemed to have received the orders of the master of the house at the same time, and they were about to start working. However, almost all of them looked pale and their eyes were dull. In a garden, a crippled boy and a round-faced girl were leaning against the wall. The crippled boy was bleeding from his 7 orifices. He was seriously injured. Even if he was allowed to leave, he would not be able to walk more than a few steps. Earlier, in order to deal with the female ghost in the bridal dress with amazing Taoism, the boy pulled the banner into the aperture acupoint on his face. It was an insidious method that damaged the divine will and soul. The girl had cut her skin several times and lost a lot of blood. Even now, she was more or less contaminated by the female ghost's yin qi. She was still dizzy and nauseous. When the lantern was lit, the crippled boy looked worse and worse. He quickly covered the girl's eyes with his hands. In the boy's sight, there were decaying skeletons. Only half of the body was exposed on the ground. They were densely packed like vegetables planted in a vegetable garden. There were no less than 40 or 50 of them. The crippled boy was in despair. Because one of the skeletons, with the spine as the center, was actually pale gold. The bones of the limbs were as white as jade, showing the appearance of a cultivator of the middle 5 realms with golden branches and jade leaves. Moreover, according to the blind old Taoist, only great Qi refinement warriors of the middle 5 realms with very high levels could have such a scene. For a wild Qi refinement warrior like the old Taoist who barely touched the threshold of the middle 5 realms, he did not even have golden branches, let alone jade leaves. No wonder he lost so badly. The difference in strength was too great. At the entrance of the mansion, the middle door was wide open. One of the 3 most powerful doctors in Dali was welcomed with a grand ceremony. The old man did not cross the threshold. Instead, he sat on the threshold and looked at the wide street outside the mansion. He said softly, "Madam Chu, can you listen to my advice and not make things difficult for those boys and girls?" The big red lantern placed at the foot of the stone lion outside the door shook violently. Someone had written the words "Soul comes and goes" in red ink on the lantern. As the lantern swayed, it rippled with traces of bright red light. The old man emphasized and reminded, "Madam Chu, once something happens to those children in your territory, not to mention this mansion of yours, even our great Li will suffer together with them." Unfortunately, there was no news. The old man was a little angry. "Madam Chu." An old man who looked like a steward stood inside the door. He wore a felt hat and had his hands behind his back. He bent over and coughed. He laughed softly and said, "Dali has divided these mountains and rivers into my young lady's territory for countless years. My young lady and your Dali have always lived in harmony. Even before this old man became a steward, I heard that my young lady had once been indebted to an ancestor of your Dali. Even now, our mansion still has the golden certificate of eternal harmony with mountains and rivers. After that unfortunate incident, your late emperor and the current emperor all tacitly agreed to my young lady's venting of anger. Why can't she do it today?" The old man in green stood up and turned to look at the old man in the felt hat. He said slowly, "Not only today, but also in the future. I will tell Madam Chu the reason in person. However, if Madam Chu is unwilling to stop and is unwilling to see me, then don't blame my Dali for not remembering our old friendship." The old steward patted his chest and stopped coughing. He said with a smile, "Dallas Mountains are in turmoil now. Unless that Master Wan personally takes action, my young lady really isn't afraid of anyone. Even if she can't defeat some of the secret consecrators of your Dali Imperial Court, if my young lady really wants to hide, do you really have the courage to dig up hundreds of miles of mountain roots in one breath and cut off the Shohua River at the same time? Aren't you afraid that this will implicate Chiduan Mountain and the fallen Pearl Grotto Heaven?" The old man in green's face was gloomy. "Our Lord is not one of those consecrators of Dali who are more arrogant than the sky. He has always been disgusted by others who want a yard after taking an inch." The door slowly closed. The old steward stood at the threshold and said with a smile, "My young lady has spoken. She wants your Dali to try. Then let's try." The Dali Minister of Rites shook his head. He was also a straightforward person. Without further ado, he walked down the steps, took back the big red lantern, and threw it into the sky. His figure disappeared. The lantern rose into the sky like a red moon. On the street at the entrance of the mansion, Chen Pingan and the others stood in the same place with heavy hearts. No one thought that they would suddenly walk to the front of this rich mansion from the mountains and dense forests. Chen Pingan was responsible for cutting through the thorns and opening the way with the auspicious symbol. At this time, he was also a little out of breath. Although he didn't use much physical strength, it was more because of the burden on his heart. The blind old daoist on Lin Shuyi's back suddenly stopped pretending to be dead. He slapped himself in the face and said with tears streaming down his face, "I didn't expect this female ghost's cultivation to be so terrifying. This poor daoist actually took the initiative to provoke her and even wanted to slay the demon. I was really blind, my dog eyes weren't blind for nothing." Lin Shuyi was shocked and quickly put the old Taoist on his back. Li Huai hid behind Li Baoping. Li Baoping's face was slightly pale. She pulled Chen Pingan's sleeve and whispered, "Young martial uncle, are you scared?" Chen Pingan raised the back of his hand and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He nodded and said, "Of course I'm scared. But it doesn't matter. Lin Shuyi and I are here." Lin Shuyi smiled bitterly and said, "I thought I could try before. Now I feel that my weight is only enough to be hooked by her little finger." Chen Pingan sheathed the auspicious symbol and handed it back to Li Baoping. Seeing that she and Lin Shuyi were puzzled, Chen Pingan explained, "Let me try later." Li Huai asked naively, "That female ghost isn't afraid of the auspicious symbol saber or Lin Shuyi's talisman. Instead, she's afraid of fists." Chen Pingan didn't say anything. He began to hold his breath and concentrate. 125. In front of the mansion that hung the plaque Xiao Shui Gao Feng. The blind old Taoist who was seriously injured probably felt that he was about to die, so he spoke carelessly as if he had lost his mind. Lin Shuyi held the two talisman of pearl in pan and fire rain in his hands in his sleeves. He did his best and left the rest to fate. Chen Pingan silently drove the Qi dragon in his body to the two Qi residences to make sure that the sword Qi was still there and that there were no accidents. How to verify this was extremely simple. As long as the fire dragon that gave the Meridians a warm feeling didn't dare to stay in front of the two Qi palaces, it meant that there were two extremely small strands of sword energy entrenched in them. This time, Chen Pingan felt that one sword Qi might not be enough to kill the wedding dress ghost. Then two sword Qi. It was better to die of heartache than to die for real. However, Chen Pingan had not used the sword Qi yet, but he was already dying of heartache. Therefore, the young moneygrubber's face seemed a little stiff and murderous. Li Huai suddenly realized that the white donkey beside him had been stomping heavily on the ground. From its initial impatience and uneasiness on the mountain path, it immediately became somewhat cheerful and joyful. Even when the wedding dress ghost appeared at the top of the steps outside the door, the donkey only slowed down its hooves slightly. The female ghost lowered her head to look at the bright red wedding dress. There were a few places that were tattered. She suppressed the monstrous anger that filled her heart and looked at the young boys and girls. Her figure floated to the ground. The female ghost turned sideways and curtsied. Her voice was soft and delicate. "Welcome to my home. You can call me Mrs. Chu. It's a pity that my Langjun has not returned from his travels. I have no choice but to entertain you." In the small bamboo forest that was covered by a formation on Chiduan Mountain, Wei Pai, who had recovered his mountain god position with the help of an opportunity, looked at the broken bamboos piled up into a mountain. They were all green bamboos that had been cut in half by Alliance. Even though the gains from this incident far outweighed the losses, when he saw the green bamboos that had absorbed the spiritual qi of Chiduan Mountain for thousands of years, they were like beauties that had been cut in half at the waist in Wei Pai's eyes. He still sighed. Wei Pai's golden earrings had been used as a camouflage. Usually, even if he revealed his true self in his own territory, the black snake would not be able to see through him. At this moment, he flicked his finger beside his ear. The broken bamboos on the ground began to disappear into thin air. After everything was tidied up, Wei Pai walked out of the bamboo forest. Other than the black snake, who was curled up not far away in fear, there was also a young swordsman with a sword behind his waist. There was also an acquaintance who was holding a wine pot and drinking wine with his head tilted back. It was the Dali master who had been knocked back to Kadunshan Shiping by Alliance's rainbow light. Wei Pai only knew that his surname was Liu. In the end, he was carried away by the swordsman. Wei Pai revealed a trace of doubt. The man who had been on the verge of death not long ago still looked a little dispirited. However, he was able to walk so quickly. Even if he had cultivated a superior secret technique to temper his body, it should not have been so miraculous. However, on the path of cultivation, to be able to reach the last two realms of the middle five realms, who did not have some hidden skills? Of course, Wei Pai would not ask. The rule that the Tao did not speak of longevity and the monk did not speak of his surname had been since ancient times. Wiping the wine stains on the corner of his mouth, the strong man said in a deep voice, "Old man of the Chiduan Mountain, my name is Liu Yu. Although I still don't like you, I will definitely repay you for saving my life in the future. If you have any urgent requests, just crush the message talisman. As long as I, Liu Yu, am not on a mission from the imperial court, I will come even if I am in the southernmost old dragon city of the Aquarius continent." The brawny man casually threw a white jade plate made of fine suet jade to Liu Yu. "Liu Yu, are you a cultivator from the Wind Snow Temple or the true Martial Mountain?" Catching the plate, Liu Yu caught it and said with a smile, "You have a clear distinction between love and hate. You are an upright person, and you also have a peaceful plate that is unique to the military mountain temple." The strong man snorted coldly, "It's none of your business." The young swordsman who had just returned from the embroidery river said with a smile, "Liu Yu is a typical person with a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Don't lower yourself to his level." Wei Pai hurriedly waved his hand, "I don't dare, I don't dare." The swordsman casually rested his elbow on the long sword and said with a gentle smile, "It just so happens that I have something to deal with in Longquan County. If you don't mind, why don't we go out together? Although I have already informed the Longquan County magistrate, Wu Yuan, There shouldn't be any twists and turns, but it's better to be safe than sorry. After all, in the Luopa mountain area, there are now Kintianjian, Mr. Ching Wu, and many other foreign forces. I don't want your relationship with Dali to be broken again. Wei Pai said casually, looking at the movements of the previous battle. Could it be that one of your Dallas 5 mountain gods has unfortunately fallen? What? Could it be that I, Wei Pai, can take this opportunity to get a small share of the soup? Sir's so-called temporary mission, could it really be related to me? The seemingly rough and reckless Liu Yu narrowed his eyes. The young swordsman was still calm and said with a smile, "Don't worry, I won't burn the bridge after crossing the river. The final outcome of this trip to Longquan still depends on your personal wishes, Wei Pai. The Dali Imperial Court will definitely not force you. As for the specific matters, to be honest, I'm not too sure. I only know that after His Majesty heard about this matter, he attached great importance to it and added the words treat with courtesy in the end." Wei Pai sighed, "I've always had a bad temper. In this case, do I still have the nerve to refuse? I'm really afraid of you." Liu Yu sneered, "You're the one who's unmoved, right?" Wei Pai said with a smile, You flatter me, you flatter me." The young swordsman glanced at the obedient and docile black snake and joked, "You have good eyesight. Remember not to cause trouble when you go to Luopa Mountain in the future. There's a snake of your kind living in the mountain lake nearby. Even if you want to fight, it's best not to involve mortals. Other than that, there's nothing else worth paying attention to. Now that you have the identity of a Dali mountain spirit, at least you don't have to worry about being casually killed by passing cultivators." The black snake nodded its head heavily. After swallowing the bag of snake gall stones from the Pearl Grotto, its body size decreased instead of increasing. However, its 4 dragon claw-like claws became thicker, and its body was covered in shiny, pitch-black scales. An imperceptible thin golden line appeared on its abdomen. There was no one on this trip to Longquan for the time being, so even with the black snake, they still didn't need to hide during the day and come out at night. After entering Tiefu River and receiving the young swordsman's nod of approval, the black snake carefully slid into the river. Although it was extremely happy, it still tried its best to suppress its instincts and didn't dare to wantonly shake its body and splash the river water. The 3 of them stood on the black snake's body. Like travelers on a boat, they easily went north along Tiefu River. Wei Pai frowned and gently flicked his sleeve. He scooped up a handful of water in his palm and shook it as if he was weighing its weight. He said in surprise, "From a river to a river, I know, but," the young swordsman explained, after the river god successfully merged into Tiefu River, she had a fortuitous encounter and alarmed one of the Mr. Ching Wu. He hurriedly reported it to the imperial court. His Majesty the Emperor was overjoyed and promoted her by another level on top of the previous 2. Wei Pai gently shook his palm, and the water of Tiefu River slowly rotated in his palm. He clicked his tongue and said, "Doesn't this newly promoted lucky one have already reached the peak of the human world? Interesting, really interesting." In just a few days, she completed the journey that her colleagues took hundreds or even thousands of years to complete. This kind of talent and opportunity is simply fate. The most important thing is that this river god's ascension doesn't seem to occupy the fate of other rivers. I have to say, Dali is really lucky. The young swordsman showed a solemn expression for the first time. Wei Pai, are you sure that her ascension didn't steal the fate of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers? Instead, it all came from the small Tiefu River in the past. Wei Pai smiled but didn't say anything. In the past, the North Mountain god of the Holy Water Country had a unique vision. Naturally, he was not comparable to Kintianjian Mr. Ching Wu, who was an outsider among insiders. Due to the previous battle in Dali Imperial Court, the country's fate was unstable. 3 of the 5 mountain gods were greatly injured, so they could only hand this matter to Mr. Ching Wu for the time being. The young swordsman said in a deep voice, "Wei Pai, I believe that you will be rewarded by the Imperial Court for this matter alone." Wei Bian raised his head. A cool breeze brushed past his face, making the young man who already looked like a banished immortal look even more ethereal. His eyes were gentle as he smiled and said, "Can you exchange it for a small opportunity? For example, Let a new disciple of Changchun Palace who already has the aptitude of the middle 5 states walk more smoothly on the longevity bridge in the next 100 years? The young swordsman smiled and said, "What's so difficult about that?" Wei Pai murmured, "I owe the Liu family of the holy water country." Liu Yu said impatiently, "It's been so many years. Even the gods of the mountains and rivers who live as long as the country are not as sentimental as you. It's already a great fortune that the statues didn't collapse after the change of dynasty. If you can choose a good master to rely on and continue to enjoy the worship of incense, it's a good thing that you can only dream of. Even if you are indebted to the Liu family of the holy water country, it's been hundreds of years. Those who deserve to die have all died. Why are you, Wei Pai, being so pretentious?" Wei Pai turned a deaf ear to him. All he could hear was the sound of the river. Liu Yu, who had a strong temperament, said angrily, "A stinky stone in the latrine. I can't believe I owe you a favor. I, Liu Yu, am so unlucky." The young swordsman laughed heartily and said, "Ill fate is also fate. You too, just accept it." Liu Yu smiled casually and asked, "I wonder if Old Lantern will have a conflict with Madame Chu on the way to the south? If they fight, I think Old Lantern will have to bear the consequences." The young swordsman shook his head and said, "I hope there won't be any trouble. Madame Chu means a lot to Dali. Moreover, Madame Chu has a strong temperament. If you weren't seriously injured and she didn't need to rush back to the Eternal Spring Palace to pick up that empress, I wouldn't have let Dr. Han escort us to the south. Dr. Han is outwardly but inwardly outwardly. His temper is worse than yours." Liu Yu laughed and said, "It's fine, there's no handsome scholar in the group. Madame Chu won't like him. Old Lantern, if you were 30 or 40 years younger, you might have been left in that mansion to be the commander-in-chief, right?" The swordsman teased, "If you have the ability, say that in front of Madame Chu." Liu Yu laughed and said, "If she dares to walk out of that mountain, I dare to say that." The young swordsman sighed and said, "The reason why saints are called saints is because they have their own little world. If they sit in it, they can take advantage of the time, place, and people." Liu Yu said regretfully, "It's a pity that you're a sword cultivator. There's no such thing for sword cultivators. Otherwise, if you have a saint's little world with both offense and defense, then you—" The young swordsman raised his eyebrows and laughed, "I already have one sword. Isn't that enough?" It was only at this moment that the young swordsman, who had a mediocre aura, gave off a dazzling feeling. Liu Yu smiled embarrassedly. Wei Pai suddenly stood up and looked over. He saw a willow tree sticking out of the water by the shore. A lady wearing a green robe and face armor was sitting on the branch of the willow tree. She had a head of rare golden hair that spread out on the surface of the Tiefu River and swayed slightly with the water. For some reason, Wei Pai thought of a popular poem for no reason. Yang Hua floats on the water like duckweed. When the young swordsman saw the lady, he explained softly, "She's the Tiefu River's main god. She just formed her golden body not long ago, and the imperial court hasn't built a temple yet. Therefore, there are still some signs of her spirit being unstable." Wei Pai didn't even turn his head and asked, "What's her name?" Liu Yu snorted and said, "This little girl's name is very good. Yang Hua as in the water Yang Hua. She was born in the countryside, but her bone structure was chosen by Mr. Qing Wu, and she was recognized by the famous Daoist sword talisman in the capital of our great Li dynasty. Now, she has become one of the few first-class Jiang deities. With her good fortune, she will definitely ascend to the heavens in the future." Wei Pai nodded and his expression returned to normal. He sat back on the black snake's back and said, "She's the Rainmaster's elephant. No wonder she can go so smoothly. With such a powerful guy as a neighbor, we'll meet frequently. God knows if it's a good thing or a bad thing." Although the young swordsman felt a little strange, he couldn't think of a reason. However, the Rainmaster's elephant was indeed rare. Wei Pai and the others rode the black snake past Yang Hua. The river god Yang Hua was indifferent. In the past, there were many poets in the divine water nation. Their farewell poems were especially praised by the world. Once the women in the brothel sang them, they were often popular in the continent. Among them, Yang Hua was Liu Shu. However, as the rough man Liu Yu said, it was all in the past. If Wei Pai didn't mention it, who would care? Even if he did, who would be willing to listen? Only the scholarly sage had a note. Yang, the one who rises from the willow. Wei Pai suddenly turned his head, but he wasn't looking at the water god Yang Hua. Instead, he was looking at the land further south than Chestun Mountain. There was a big red lantern rising slowly. The young swordsman held the hilt of the sword at his waist with one hand and said with a solemn expression, "It seems that I have to go there personally." But at this moment, in a towering mountain at the border of Dali, a white light broke through the top of the mountain and flew rapidly to the north. It was like a comet dragging an extremely long snow-white rainbow. It was actually caused by the sword chi of a flying sword, and the owner of the sword was nowhere to be seen. The sword chi was long and heavy. This sword landed not far from the embroidery river. The sword broke through a powerful array that was close to the sage domain and landed right in front of a white donkey. End of this chapter. 126. The sword broke through the sky and landed on the street in front of the mansion. The rainbow light of the sword chi, which was like a comet, did not disperse for a long time. It was like a ray of dazzling sunlight shining through the window into the lifeless house. The white donkey ran in circles as if it had met an old friend in a foreign land. The ghost in the wedding dress was obviously shocked. As the owner of this place, she felt the power of the sword more clearly than anyone else. The mountain was shaking and the water vapor was boiling. If she had not used her chi to cover the mansion behind her, half of the thousands of lanterns in the mansion would have been extinguished. The ghost was shocked and angry. She did not look at the place where the flying sword landed, but at the gap in the gloomy sky that could not be repaired. At the same time, drops of blood seeped out from the surface of the bright red wedding dress. They rolled on the lotus leaves like water droplets. Eventually, there were more and more of them. The ghost shook her sleeves and roared angrily, "Trespassers will die. How dare you, sword fairy? I will take your head and plant it in the garden. I will let you live for 10 or even 100 years. Laughter came from afar. Eventually, the voice condensed on the flying sword on the ground. The voice was not only warm but also had a unique charm. It was like the romantic scene described by the children of aristocratic families. It gave people the feeling of bathing in the spring breeze. However, in his words, he did not hide his soaring heroism. "Miss, please wait for a moment. My body has not completely stabilized. I can't compare with the speed of the flying sword. But I wonder how the scenery of your garden is. The place is not big, and the scenery is not good. It is enough to plant a head." The ghost in the wedding dress's pale face turned a gloomy purple. Her smile was ferocious. From the sleeves of her wedding dress, 2 scarlet streams gushed toward the gap in the sky. Someone shouted loudly, "Sword chi, retreat." The thick sky shook violently. The 2 streams of blood that flowed backward and gathered at the gap suddenly exploded in all directions on the dome of the small world. It was like a rain of blood. The ghost's body trembled. She shook her sleeves gently and countless raindrops returned to her sleeves. A young man in a white robe descended from the sky. He was surrounded by a layer of white mist, like the mist of a big lake or the wind of a mountain peak. The man's hair was tied up without a hairpin or crown. His hands were together like swords. There was a strong sword chi that was as thick as a young man's arm. It was bright and dazzling, like a white flood dragon circling around him. The moment the yin chi and the scarlet blood met the sword chi, it dissipated instantly. Looking at the handsome man who was less than 30 years old, who landed between Chen Ping'an's group and the ghost in the wedding dress, the flying sword on the ground whooshed to the side of the man and pointed at the plaque on the door, "Xiu Shui Jiao Feng." The man withdrew his 2 fingers. The condensed and abundant sword chi paused for a moment. The man turned his head and saw the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket with a small bookcase on her back. The man suddenly remembered that there was an old object that he had depended on for many years that no longer belonged to him. Then he smiled and waved his hand. Li Baoping's green bamboo bookcase shook slightly. The silver gourd hidden inside shook slightly. A snow-white flying sword less than 2 inches long flew out of the sword-nourishing gourd. The sword chi reluctantly went into the flying sword, and the flying sword rushed to the middle of the man's eyebrows and disappeared in a flash. The sword fairy man rubbed the middle of his eyebrows and joked, "Let's go everywhere together. You are not a girl waiting to be married. You must stay in the embroidery tower and not go downstairs." The white donkey trotted briskly to the man's side and rubbed its head against the man's shoulder intimately. The man smiled and reached out his hand to stroke the donkey's head. "Old buddy, long time no see. I really miss you." The gap in the sky was slowly closing as the man forced his way in. However, he had consumed a lot of spiritual chi of mountains and rivers. In a short time, at least 50 years of accumulated wealth was swept away and turned into useless turbid chi. The ghost in the wedding dress regained her calmness and sneered, "Sword chi, natal flying sword, each is more powerful than the last. What an outstanding land sword fairy. You are not from Dali, are you?" The sword fairy man smiled and said, "I am just a rootless duckweed. My name is not worth mentioning." After saying this, the man did not turn his head. Instead, he turned around and showed his back to the ghost in the wedding dress. The land sword fairy who had just come out of seclusion said gently, "I am Alliance's half-friend." "Well, only half. Half is his disciple." Unfortunately, Alliance did not want to acknowledge me as his disciple. He said that I was too pedantic and soft, so my sword was never fast enough. If he acknowledged me as his disciple, he could not afford to lose face. I came all the way here because I sensed something strange in my old buddy and the sword-cultivating gourd. If I may ask, where is Alliance? And you are? Chen Pingan explained, "We are also Alliance's friends." The gourd was given to Li Baoping by Alliance. The donkey was taken care of by Li Huai. As for Alliance's whereabouts, I believe that you will hear about it in the future. Compared to the ghost in the wedding dress, this land sword fairy who claimed to be Alliance's friend, Li Huai, who always had strange thoughts, was not unfamiliar with this person at all. In the child's opinion, Alliance's friend was Li Huai's friend. As for whether you were a sword fairy or not, was it more important than being friends? However, the incident at the Xiuhua River ferry made Li Huai afraid of ropes after being bitten once. He did not dare to speak casually. He just kept winking at the white donkey. The young sword fairy listened carefully to the words of the straw sandals youth, then nodded and said, "I have a general understanding." Almost everyone felt the ground tremble slightly, like a turtle turning over, or the precursor of a mountain collapsing. The ghost in the wedding dress's expression changed greatly. Just as she was about to leave, she found that her vital flying sword had pinned her vital chi to the spot. The snow-white flying sword had unknowingly stopped 3 feet above her head. The ghost in the wedding dress was full of anger and shouted angrily, "Dr. Han, water god of the Xiuhua River, are you two not going to do anything? If the yin spirit really breaks the mountain's roots and heads north, not only will the 3 rivers of the Xiuhua River be affected, but also the Chiduan Mountain, the Tiefu River, and the Dragon Whisker River in the north. Which side will be spared and not be affected?" An old man holding a big red lantern stood in the sky outside the canopy and sneered, "Where did Madame Chu's previous imposing manner go?" The ghost's expression darkened. Beside the old man stood a general in armor with a green snake coiled around his arm. He came out to mediate the situation, lest the Doctor of Rites and Madame Chu fall out and ruin Dallas' luck. He said in a deep voice, "Madame Chu, Dr. Han and I can persuade the yin spirit to stop breaking the mountain's roots, but we also hope that Madame Chu will not do anything extreme in the future." The bridal gown ghost smiled sweetly and said, "If I wish to spar with this sword immortal, would that be considered extreme?" Dr. Han was so angry that he laughed, "What a bodhisattva, Madame Chu. I have learned my lesson today. Good, good, good. The Ministry of Rites of Dali will repay you in the future." The ghost sneered and said, "You are just a little doctor, spouting nonsense. Are you trying to scare a child? Wait until you become the Minister of Rites of Dali, then you have the right to order me around." The green snake on the arm of the Jiangshan quickly spat out a white fog. He was obviously more familiar with Dallas officialdom and its future trends than the ghost in the wedding dress who was isolated from the world. He said with a displeased expression, "Madame Chu." The ghost in the wedding dress covered her mouth and laughed coquettishly. She lifted her dress with one hand and curtsied sideways, "I will apologize to Sir Han." The old man with the lantern was so angry that his lips turned blue. However, he still did not say a word. Everything was for the stability of Dallas' situation. If not, with Madame Chu's brutal behavior of wantonly killing passing scholars, how could the Ministry of Rights of Dali choose to turn a blind eye for decades? But then again, the old man did not think that the Dali imperial court did anything wrong. The hegemony of the mountains and rivers lasted for thousands of years. What was the death of a few people? Innocent or unfortunate, what was the point? If he was not a Dali official, not the Minister of Rights who was responsible for contacting and recruiting Qi cultivators, according to his temperament, as a Confucian student, he would definitely resolutely take action, even if it meant that both sides would suffer losses. However, the old man had walked step by step to reach his position today. He had seen tens of thousands of casualties on the battlefield. He had seen the names of the noble mansions in Dallas capital changed. He had seen the assassination of the death soldiers of other countries like moths to a flame. He had seen the tragic situation of hundreds and thousands of people at the foot of the mountain when two immortals fought on the mountain. In his position, he planned for his government. He, Han, was no longer the poor scholar who studied the books of the sages and only knew the principles in the books. He even personally killed the chivalrous warrior who was righteous when he saw injustice and only sought revenge on the immortals on the mountain for the sake of the innocent people in Dallas law. Before the man died, he cursed loudly, saying that Dali was ridiculous and that he was the lackey of the immortals on the mountain. He calmly told the man that perhaps in 30 years, or even 50 years, there would definitely be a day when there would no longer be such a tragic death in the Great Li. That chivalrous martial artist spat blood on his face before he died. How could there be such a simple thing in the world? The old man with the lantern in his hand looked to the north with complicated thoughts. He did not know why his master was not in a hurry to show up and take action. The young sword immortal ignored Mrs. Chu and the Dali minister. As for the water deity and yin deity, he was too lazy to care. He turned around again and faced the wedding dress ghost who was stunned by his flying sword. He smiled and asked, "Do you want to exchange swordsmanship with me?" The wedding dress ghost smiled and said, "If you want to stop, I am willing. After all, I have never seen a young sword immortal like you in my life." The young sword immortal waved his hand and the white donkey quickly ran back to Li Huai. The man reached out to the sword hanging beside him and nodded, "Okay." The wedding dress ghost narrowed her eyes. "Oh? Are you serious?" The young sword immortal grasped the sword hilt and said softly, "The name of the sword is Jiaozhu." A simple slash of the sword. But it changed the color of the sky and made this small world full of gloomy aura suddenly shine brightly. The sword Qi instantly slashed at the ghost. Panicking, the wedding dress ghost could only raise her hands to cover her face and her wide sleeves to cover her whole body. The ghost was slashed into two on the spot. The wail of Mrs. Chu resounded through the street and the magnificent mansion behind her. The servants and maids stood where they were in a daze and began to bleed from their 7 orifices. Some directly collapsed to the ground and turned into a pool of pus. Inside the mansion, there were noble ladies who were learning needlework. Needles were piercing into their arms without them realizing it. There were guards who were practicing martial arts standing where they were and punched each other's heads. Even if half of their heads were broken, their movements did not stop. The ghost hurriedly rushed to the gate of the mansion. The two halves of her body were connected by countless red threads. The scene was like a lotus root that was cut in half. At this moment, the two halves quickly merged together in the air. The young sword immortal said indifferently, "Again." A slash of the sword. The slash of the sword spread out in the air like a sparkling water surface. The wedding dress ghost was like a beauty who had just come out of the bath. Her waist was covered by the water surface. The wedding dress fell limply to the top of the stairs. The ghost turned into billowing smoke and flew into the golden plaque. Blood constantly fell to the ground. A woman's face, contorted in pain, protruded from the surface of the plaque from time to time. She begged for mercy, "Spare me, sword immortal." The young sword immortal attacked twice. After only 2 attacks, the soul of the arrogant ghost in the bridal dress was split into 4 parts. She had to return to the plaque where the mountain root and water source of this small world was entrusted. She could only catch her last breath. There was a saying in the world, living under the eaves of others. Actually, it had already revealed part of the heavenly secrets. Under the eaves of ordinary people, be it the beams or the plaques, there were often great mysteries. Lin Shuyi's mind wavered. No wonder Alliance said that among the Qi practitioners in the world, sword immortals were the most carefree, the most lethal, and the most unreasonable. It was a pity that although Lin Shuyi had a good aptitude for cultivation, he was not suitable for the path of sword immortals. Lin Shuyi felt a little regretful, but soon he made up his mind. Wouldn't it be better if he could rely on the heavenly Daoist method to defeat a sword immortal on the land who was so good at sword art? However, Lin Shuyi was very clear that the man in front of him was most likely the legendary Qi cultivator of the upper 5 realms. If the pure martial artists outside the Qi cultivators were always one level lower than the Qi cultivators, then the sword cultivators among the Qi cultivators were always one level higher than the other Qi cultivators. The reason was very simple. No one was willing to fight with a sword immortal who had achieved Dao. It was said that someone once calculated that among the Qi cultivators who broke the longevity bridge of the enemy, the sword cultivator was undoubtedly the most, accounting for 1/3 of the total. They were even more decisive than the military cultivators who killed decisively and were not tainted by karma. One must know that there were thousands of paths of cultivation, and each path was predestined. The sword cultivator was just one of them. Chen Ping'an's thoughts were not as complicated as Lin Shuyi's. He was just thinking about one thing. It turned out that the sword could be used in this way. The young sword immortal put one hand behind his back and held the long sword in the other hand. He smiled and said, "You can't do the same thing more than 3 times. Mrs. Chu, why don't you take my sword?" A figure quietly appeared under the horizontal board. It was a man who was also young, but he looked ordinary. He held the sword behind his waist and said slowly, "Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple." "That's enough." The sword immortal in white smiled and said, "Wei Jin of the Immortal Stage." Without saying anything more, the sword immortal on the land, who claimed that he had not stabilized his realm, waved his sword again. The young swordsman in front of him was expressionless. He reached out to hold the sword hilt and slowly pulled it out for more than an inch. Then he stopped. However, between the 2 sword immortals, a small and cute mountain range appeared. The mountain range was winding and hanging in the sky. The young sword immortal Wei Jin cut the mountain range with one sword. However, there was not much spirit left in this sword, so he did not continue to attack. Thousands of miles away, there was a huge valley at the top of a mountain range that stretched for hundreds of miles. It was as if an immortal had cut it with his sword. 127. Wei Jin smiled and asked, "Are you that person from the Mo family?" The young swordsman's expression was not good. He thought, "Senior Alliance, can't you say one more name?" He said to Wei Jin, "Wait a moment. 8, red, book. 2∞30 not equal to." The young swordsman turned to the female ghost attached to the plaque and frowned, "Madam Chu, now that things have come to this, can you show some sincerity?" The female ghost whose soul was hidden in the plaque nodded. Then the sky gradually disappeared. This was a sign that the boundary between the mountains and rivers was dissipating. It was similar to the common people opening the door to welcome guests. No matter how ignorant and inexperienced she was, she had also heard of the various legendary deeds of this person. He was born in the school of Mo's ranger lineage, and after joining the Great Li's Song clan, he was immediately treated as an honored guest by the Great Li's emperor. Now, he was one of the gatekeepers of the Great Li's capital city, and one of the key figures in the Great Li's power to intimidate the forces on the mountain. It was said that when he had free time, he would travel alone. Every time he saw a mountain or river, he would turn it into his sword will. As a result, the Ministry of Rights doctor and the embroidery river god appeared on the street and bowed to the young swordsman. The latter only nodded in acknowledgement. It was clear that this person had a high status in Dali. The yin spirit also stood beside Chen Ping'an with a murderous aura. Just now, he had almost sacrificed his cultivation to break the mountain's root. He wanted to fight to the death with the ghost in the wedding dress. Once the mountain's root was broken, it meant that the ghost's amulet was no more. She would completely lose the confidence to fight against the cultivators of the 10th realm. A suet jade-like arm stretched out from the horizontal inscribed board. The wedding dress on the ground floated towards the horizontal inscribed board. When the female ghost came out from the horizontal inscribed board, she put on the wedding dress again. Previously, her body was cut into 4 by the immortal deity stage Wei Jin. Even though she was in a life-threatening situation, she did not forget to keep the wedding dress intact. It was enough to show how much she cherished the wedding dress and how obsessed she was with it. After the female ghost landed on the ground, she inadvertently caught a glimpse of the bookcases on the backs of the children. Her eyes instantly changed and a vicious aura erupted from her body. Although she tried her best to suppress it, the strangeness of the female ghost was clearly displayed. The young swordsman sighed and looked at the young man with straw sandals whom he had met once on the ferry of the Embroidery River. He pleaded sincerely, "Can you please put away the 3 boxes first?" Mrs. Chu's resentment towards scholars was the crux of her abandonment of the god of mountains and rivers. The reason for this is really difficult to explain in a few words. Chen Ping'an, I only hope that you can be lenient. Seeing that we didn't make a big mistake, let's forget about this enmity. How about it? The young swordsman thought for a moment and said with a smile, "If it's possible, you just need to promise me to use a camouflage technique." Chen Ping'an nodded. "Sure." Very soon, the 3 emerald green bookcases disappeared from everyone's sight. Of course, if the Qi refinement warriors focused on them, they would reveal their true forms. The young swordsman finally looked at Wei Jin again. This was the youngest cultivator of the upper 5 realms in the Eastern Treasure Bottle continent. Moreover, he was a sword cultivator whose combat strength could be 1 realm higher. A cultivator of the upper 5 realms at the age of 40. No matter which continent he was in, even if it was the vast central divine continent, he was still a shocking god's favored son. Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple and Song Jianqiang of Dali. Among the young cultivators on the mountain, they were the well-deserved twin annulus of the north and south. Now, one of them had broken through the 10th realm and reached the 11th realm of sword cultivator, while the other had reached the legendary 10th realm of martial arts. Indeed, they did not disappoint. The 2 of them were 1 scholar and 1 warrior. Their future achievements were limitless. The young swordsman asked with a smile, "I wonder if Sword Immortal Wei has any other plans for coming to Dali this time other than solving today's crisis?" The white-clothed Sword Immortal, who had always traveled the Jianghu with the identity of a chivalrous man, asked back with a smile, "If there are no other plans, what will happen?" "If there are, what will happen?" The young swordsman said bluntly, "If it's just for sightseeing, except for a few forbidden areas in Dali, Sword Immortal Wei is welcome to visit the rest of the places. If you don't mind, I'm willing to accompany you. If you have ulterior motives while the situation in Dali is unstable, then I'll block you here and personally test how fast Sword Immortal Wei's flying sword is." Wei Jin put away the famous sword named Jiao Zhu in his hand and hung it by his waist. "In the Wind Snow Temple, I've always respected Master Wan the most, but for various reasons, I've never met him. Therefore, after receiving the message from Master Wan's peace token from Pearl Cave, I accepted a mission to escort these children to Yefu Pass at the border of Dali. Along the way, I met a senior swordsman named Alliance, who gave me some advice on swordsmanship. Only then did I have the opportunity to undergo closed-door training and break through the realm. Therefore, you don't have to worry about me going north this time." The young swordsman opposite him, whose mountain-moving swordsmanship was extremely amazing, treated him with sincerity. Wei Jin was an upright and open-minded person, so he did not take his slightly stiff attitude as a provocation. Instead, he bared his heart and said, "If you want to compare swordsmanship with me, I'm very willing. Previously, I thought that there was no need to continue traveling in my hometown, the Aquarius continent. However, after hearing a lot about the outside world from Alliance, I really want to go to the Inverted Mountain to take a look. I want to go to the place where Alliance trained and really sharpen my swordsmanship." It was precisely because he had traveled to many places and met many people that Wei Jin knew the value of the word perseverance. The blind old Taoist could not interrupt at all, nor did he have the courage to speak. The famous Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple was enough to make this unorthodox old Taoist feel suffocated. Cultivators of the upper 5 realms, in the eastern Aquarius continent, were extremely rare existences. It must be known that a cultivator of the 10th realm was already the cornerstone of a country, and all of them were worshipped by the kings and emperors to protect the country's fate. Chi cultivators of the upper 5 realms, which one of them was not a dragon that appeared and disappeared? They were existences that could establish a sect. In the Aquarius continent, there were many dynasties, but how many immortal mansions with the word sect as the suffix? It could be counted with one's fingers. Wei Jin clasped his fists and said to the young swordsman, "We will meet again someday." The young swordsman also clasped his fists and returned the greeting, "I hope that in the future, I can hear news about you from the inverted mountain in the Aquarius continent." The 2 sword cultivators looked at each other and smiled. Old hairs are like new, old friends are like old friends, this was the principle. Chen Pinggan said softly, "Let's go." Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi nodded. The blind old Taoist gritted his teeth and mustered up his courage to ask carefully, "Immortal Master, I have 2 disciples that Mrs. Chu asked to stay in the mansion as guests. Can I take them away? I am afraid that my disciples are uncouth and naughty, and might accidentally break Mrs. Chu's rules." The young swordsman turned to the ghost in the wedding dress and said gently, "Mrs. Chu, can you let us go?" The ghost in the wedding dress nodded and said, "Since you have spoken, how can I dare to disobey?" This hidden gatekeeper of the capital could block Wei Jin's 3rd sword with just an inch of his sword out of the sheath. The ghost in the wedding dress knew very well how powerful he was. In short, he was not someone she could contend against. Even if she was at her peak, with the protection of the mountains and rivers, it would be meaningless. Moreover, she was not a true 10th realm cultivator, and this strange swordsman from the school of Moism might be like Wei Jin, an 11th realm sword immortal. She was somewhat annoyed and narrowed her eyes at the young boys and girls. If not for one of them causing her to be unable to light the lantern and seeing their disgusting appearance of traveling, she would not have been reduced to such a miserable state. Not to mention that she had taken 2 swords from the sword immortal Wei Jin, even the water source of the mountain was almost destroyed by the yin spirit. Wei Jin led the white donkey and asked Chen Pinggan and the others with a smile, "Then shall we hurry on our way?" Chen Pinggan naturally had no objections. With the addition of a traveling sword immortal, the traveling group slowly left just like that. Li Baoping came to Chen Pinggan's side and said, "Little martial uncle." Chen Pinggan asked softly, "What's wrong?" Li Baoping chuckled. "Nothing." Chen Pinggan rubbed her head. The girl in the red cotton-padded jacket walked side by side with Chen Pinggan. Actually, she was somewhat missing her elder brother. The ghost in the wedding dress waved her hand and casually pulled the crippled youth and the round-faced girl out of the garden and threw them beside the blind old Taoist. After that, she glanced in a direction out of the corner of her eye. Coincidentally, the ghost in the wedding dress saw the straw sandals youth looking back. They stared at each other. The youth's eyes were cold. For a moment, the ghost in the wedding dress felt her heart palpitate for no reason. However, she soon found it ridiculous and quickly retracted her gaze, no longer wasting time on an ordinary youth. The ghost in the wedding dress did not understand why she was so suspicious. Then, for some reason, she looked again. The straw sandals youth had his back to her and was slowly walking away. Naturally, he was at the back of the group. For thousands of years, the 4 great clans and 10 great clans in the Peachleaf Alley of Fulu Street had been filled with scheming against each other, and there was no lack of bloodshed. However, now that it had become Longquan County, they had no choice but to band together and gather their forces. However, in private, who was not secretly in contact with the imperial court of Great Li and those immortal forces who had bought the mountains? There were some rumors that were spread as if they were true, but the people on the streets and alleys didn't take them seriously. For example, one of the 4 surnames, the Li family's Dragon Lin and Phoenix, had a sad end after Li Baoping's teacher, the Cliff Academy's Mountain Lord, had become a joke. On the other hand, a few young scholars, including Zhao Yaro, had the potential to become immortals on the mountain. They were existences that the big families in the small town did not dare to underestimate. However, it was said that the second son of the head of the Li family, Li Baozhen, had met a noble in the capital and became a supervisor of the imperial college. He had followed the famous scholar Liu Wanhu to learn the great etiquette, which had caused a small stir in the small town. As for Li Hong's eldest son, all the elders in Fulu Street had the impression that he was a bookworm who had become stupid from studying. The youngest daughter, Li Baoping, was a crazy girl who had not been at home since she was young. Other than that, there was nothing special about them. Only Li Baozhen had some hope of bringing glory to the family. In the study of the Li family, a young man with a distant expression handed a letter from the capital of Dali to his father, Li Hong. Li Hong smiled and said, "Baozhen is like his sister. He would rather send it to you, his big brother, than to his parents." The young man smiled bitterly and said softly, "Father, you have to be mentally prepared for what is written in the letter." Li Hong's expression instantly became serious. After taking out the letter, he roughly skimmed through the greetings. The more he read, the gloomier his expression became. The man stood up and lit an oil lamp. He placed it in the brush washer and burned the letter bit by bit. The ashes slowly fell into the plum-green brush washer. The man used 2 words to conclude his son's actions: nonsense. Li Hong asked, "What do you think about this matter? Do you want to listen to your brother's suggestion and have Zhu He and Zhu Lu, father and daughter, removed their lowly status from our Li family through the county yamen and help promote them to commoners? If the father and daughter of the Zhu family successfully changed their household registration, they would be removed from the lowly servant status of the Li family on Fulu Street in Longquan County and obtain commoner status. Henceforth, their descendants would not have to be slaves for generations. It would not be an exaggeration to describe it as a carp jumping through the dragon's gate." However, the Prime Minister's concierge had 7 ranks of officials. Who was better and who was worse depended on the ability of the person who left the lowly status. For those who only knew how to flatter, of course, it would be safer to rely on a big tree. If they had real talent, naturally, it would be more promising to establish their own family. The young man smiled bitterly and said, "Father, you already have an idea." Li Hong leaned back against the chair and rubbed his temples with both hands. "But I still want to hear your opinion. In a family, not everyone can think of riches and honor in danger." The young man sat there quietly with bright eyes. "The truly tricky part is that no matter which side you favor, it will cause estrangement between the other side and the family. Therefore, Baozhen did wrong this time." Baozhen was stubborn and did not leave a way out for himself and the family, which was even more wrong. It was not kind to do so. It was wrong to let down that Chen Pingan from Mud Bottle Alley. Li Hong looked at the eldest son with a complicated expression. "How can you not know Baozhen's temperament as his brother? If you knew it would be such an awkward situation, why didn't you go with him to the capital?" The young man said helplessly, "Grandfather is in seclusion, Baozhen left home, and now the situation in the small town is turning upside down. It is a critical time to decide the future of the major families. Our Li family can't be in the dark. I don't feel at ease leaving. Even if I want to leave, I have to wait until the situation here is clear. If it really doesn't work, the imperial examination can be put aside." Hearing the mature and prudent words, Li Hong nodded slightly. When the eldest son said the last sentence, Li Hong suddenly became anxious. She straightened her back and said loudly, "Absolutely not. The imperial examination is the most important national policy of Dali. It is not inferior to the imperial court's recruitment of the forces on the mountain. Li Baozhen is more impatient than you. Before leaving home, although in front of me and your grandfather, he said that after leaving the small town, he would follow the rules and do things openly. He would not take any chances and take risks. But in the end, didn't he act first and report later? So we can only let him do as he pleases. In this way, if you delay the imperial examination, it is equal to slowing down the family's pace for at least 3 years." The young man silently swallowed back the words that were about to come out of his mouth. As long as he said it, it meant that his relationship with his brother, which was not very good, would fall to the bottom in an instant, and there would be no possibility of mending it. Moreover, it was meaningless to say it, because deep in his heart, his father did not deny his brother's pursuit of riches and honor. On the wrong path, he rose early and worked hard for 3 years. On the right path, he restrained himself and lay low for 3 years. The difference in the impact of the two on the next 30 years of the family and on the 2 generations was self-evident. After the young man walked out of the study, he walked alone in the elegant and spacious outer corridor. He suddenly heard the tinkling of a string of wind chimes under the eaves. He closed his eyes and looked up slightly. Listening to the ethereal tinkling sound, he murmured, "It's not good to have too many smart people." The scholar in green was called Li Shisheng. 128. Without the ghost in the wedding dress causing trouble in the dark, Chen Pinggan and his companions can go on without any hindrance. There is a road leading to the mansion in the valley. Originally, it was wide enough for 2 carriages to go side by side. Now, although it is covered with weeds and cold rain, it is much better than when Chen Pinggan had to open the road with the auspicious symbol with the narrow saber after he left the road to the underworld with the barrier-breaking charm. The man who was called the Land Sword Immortal by the ghost in the wedding dress does not speak after he suddenly joins the team. This sword practitioner of the immortal level of the Wind Snow Temple leads the white donkey with one hand and holds the hilt of the sword at his waist with the other hand. He walks with his eyes closed and his mind wandering. If there was a chasm between the lower 5 levels and the middle 5 levels, then there was a chasm between the 10th level and the 11th level. Even the Qi refinement warriors of the 10th level, who were the pillars of the dynasty in the mortal world below the mountain, had to sit like dead bones for decades or even centuries. In the end, they finally found the opportunity to break through the level after a long period of silence and walked down the mountain from the blessed land and the mountain gate. However, in the end, it was all for naught. There were still many of them who returned to the mountain and continued to sit and face the wall. Wei Yijin quietly ended the unique breathing method of the Wind Snow Temple. He opened his eyes, turned around, and looked at the children who were familiar with Ah Liang. However, this white-robed sword immortal's mind was more focused on the memorial ceremony in the Wind Snow Temple. Since he couldn't break through the realm, he hadn't gone to his master's grave to propose a toast to him for many years. Besides, after hearing Ah Liang's so-called *T stories, Wei Yijin was full of longing for the inverted mountains that connected the 2 worlds. He was even more fascinated by the Great Wall, which was filled with sword cultivators. Wei Yijin sighs and feels that it is not enough. If he had been under the banner of Xiao Shui Jiao Feng before, his body would have been stable and perfectly integrated with the sword intent. Then, there would be no flaw in his sword. At that time, the paladin of the school of Mo who blocked his way would have drawn his sword more than an inch away. At least half of the sword would have been out of the sheath. Li Huai looks at the white sword immortal whose eyes are drifting. He is very curious but also regretful. If only Alliance were here. Li Huai wants to pat Alliance on the shoulder and tell him that he is a master of swordsmanship and that Alliance is still not good enough. In the future, he should learn more from others. Look at Wei Yijin's appearance. Before he arrived, his sword had already arrived. His white robe was surrounded by sword qi, and he beat the evil woman until she cried for her parents. This earth-shattering appearance is not the same as Alliance's wearing a bamboo hat and walking by the river with a donkey. Lin Shuyi finds that after Wei Yijin is looking at them, he also notices that the sword practitioner of the Wind Snow Temple is absent-minded. The cold-looking young man quietly holds the book box and thinks about his own cultivation. Lin Shuyi had experienced the unfathomable spells of the female ghost in the bridal dress and witnessed the superb swordsmanship of the 2 sword cultivators. Lin Shuyi's heart was heavy. There was still a long way to go. His little cultivation was not even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Wei Yijin draws back his unfocused gaze and stops. He takes out a jade plate that emits a sheepish luster from his sleeve and says frankly with a smile, "I can't follow you all the way to Dalis Yefu Pass. I need to go to Lizhu Cave immediately. I need to go to the dragon beheading platform there to sharpen my sword Gao Zhu and natal flying sword in preparation for the heart of the inverted hanging mountain in the future. Because Senior Alliance said that we can go to that place through the inverted hanging mountain. Now it's a once-in-a-century battle. I can't miss it." Seeing that no one takes the jade plate, Wei Jin explains patiently, although you are escorted by a yin god whose strength is not to be underestimated, in order to prevent today's accident from happening again, I give you this jade plate. This is the Mountain Temple Peace Plate unique to our Wind Snow Temple and Martial Mountain. Once you are in danger, as long as the holder injects his genuine qi and speaks to it, it will fly to the mountain temple on its own and send a call for help to its sect. Wei Jin saw that no one had taken the jade token of great significance. He didn't blame these children for not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Instead, he smiled and said, if you think that I'll be safer accompanying you to Yefu Pass than holding a small jade token, of course, I won't shirk my responsibility. I'm just discussing it with you. In the end, it's up to you. Chen Pinggan says, Senior Sword Wiz can go to Longquan County by himself and find the dragon beheading platform to sharpen his sword. We just need to take this jade plate. Senior Yin God is escorting us to Yefu Pass this time. In addition, the Dali Imperial Court has promised us before. That's why those 3 people appeared beside the female ghost. Although they are a little late, it proves that they keep their word. Chen Pinggan thinks for a moment and says seriously, I believe that such a big accident as today won't happen again and again. He takes the plate and passes it to Lin Shuyi. He whispers, remember to keep it well. It's best not to put it in the box. If it's too far away, it'll be inconvenient to take it out in an emergency. Lin Shuyi nods and says softly, I know. I'll hide it in my sleeve with the other 2 talisman. Wei Jin smiles knowingly. He is a little surprised by this straw sandal boy's understanding. In fact, Wei Jin was a little puzzled. Why did this person make the decision in the group? Earlier, on the street in front of the female ghost's mansion, Wei Jin saw that the boy named Lin Shuyi has already set foot on the longevity bridge. His Qi Palace is full of vitality, magnificent and stable. He is a rare cultivator. The boy still has that kind of noble and arrogant personality. How can he be willing to be under others? And the key is that the boy himself doesn't seem to feel that there is anything wrong with it. As for the youngest and strong-minded guy, since he was arranged by Alliance to look after the white donkey, there is no need to say more about his good fortune. This is because no matter what, Wei Jin will give Li Huai a parting gift. He, Wei Jin, has traveled the countries alone. For so many years, he has no worries. He has encountered all kinds of fortuitous encounters and obtained many good things in his pocket. Most of them are casually distributed to the fated people. The things that can be kept until now are naturally the most important things. What's more, when Wei Jin uses his clear sword heart to illuminate Li Huai and sweep away the fog that was deliberately created by someone, he discovers that Li Huai's innate foundation is actually better than Lin Shuyi's. He is a first-rate fine jade that the forefathers of the School of War dream of. In Sword Immortal Wei Jin's eyes, the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket who is shrouded in white mist opens her mouth and asks, if this plate encounters today's situation, can it really fly out? If it encounters the road to the Yellow Springs from before, and the layer of darkness that Senior used the flying sword to break open, will it block its path? Wei Jin laughed and said, you can rest assured. Even the sage's domain of a cultivator in the 10th realm can't trap it. This thing is extremely fast, far faster than the flying sword. When the jade plate is flying, the cultivators of the Wind Snow Temple who travel down the mountain will lead it to their side with secret skills as long as they can sense its existence. They are often willing to save it. Therefore, most of the crises can be solved without the help of the sect. The little girl nodded and said, I understand. The jade plate itself is a kind of customs document. If the opponent can't even defeat Senior Yin Shen, his identity must be very complicated. With their age and experience, they will recognize this piece and peace plate of the Wind Snow Temple at a glance. They will definitely be afraid of Senior Sword Immortal and your sect. Therefore, even if the jade plate can't reach the Wind Snow Temple in time, as long as the jade plate is used, it is already a kind of deterrence. It is equivalent to advising the other party not to provoke the Wind Snow Temple. Wei Jin was stunned. He was amazed by the little girl's early wisdom and insight. Looking at the little girl with a serious face, he suddenly felt happy. Naturally, he felt that she was close and cute. In the end, Wei Jin inadvertently glanced at the boy with straw sandals again. Is it because he is older that he is the leader of the 3 children? Wei Jin looked away and looked at Li Huai, the child who had helped him take care of the donkey all the way. After weighing the pros and cons, he shook his wrist and a row of clay figurines appeared in his palm. They were only half a finger high. There was a swordsman with a sword, a taoist with a horsetail whisk, an armored general, a woman riding a crane, and a gong and drum watchman. There were 5 of them in total. Wei Jin handed them to Li Huai. These 5 clay figurines are considered half-dead objects. They are a combination of the school of yin-yang, the school of Moism's puppetry techniques, and the profound knowledge of the Daoist talisman lineage. I don't understand the profoundness behind it. I only know that if they are nurtured properly and familiarized with your aura, they may come back to life one day. In the future, they will need to be constantly fed with the essence of the 5 elements, such as fire spirit and water essence. Their highest cultivation level is limited by their small body's chi residence, meridians, and so on. At most, they will be equivalent to a 7th or 8th realm chi refinement warrior. At this point, Wei Jin felt that he had misspoken and stopped talking. He only smiled and looked at Li Huai. The child did not forget to turn his head and look at Chen Pinggan. The latter quickly nodded. Li Huai then hugged the 5 clay figurines. He thought to himself, including the painted puppet that lives in the book box on my back, I already have 6 minions. Wei Jin flipped over and rode on the donkey. Then I'll take my leave. I hope all of you have a safe journey. Although Wei Jin was heroic and chivalrous by nature, he was not the kind of child of wealth. On the path of cultivation, the great Tao was long. It was actually very difficult to know if it was a good or bad fate that was formed after a short contact with each other. Without the right timing and right amount of fate, with the current rich fate of the Wei and Jin dynasties and the unpredictable will of the heavens, if the person who received the gift from the Wei and Jin dynasties did not have a strong fate, who knew if they would be harmed and die halfway? Why did the people on the mountain go down the mountain to accept disciples and be so cautious? Many experiences and tests would last for years or even decades. Wei Jin believed that these children were definitely not simple since Alliance had traveled with them previously. As for who was the person that Alliance cared about the most and valued the most, it could be Li Huai, who had a great background and great fortune. It could also be the naturally likable girl in the red cotton-padded jacket. It could also be Lin Shuyi, who had a firm Taoist heart. It could be any of the 3 children, or it could even be one of them. However, it was urgent for Wei Jin to rush to the inverted mountain. Otherwise, he would miss the soul-stirring peak battle. Otherwise, he would really want to accompany this group of children to the border Yefu Pass. As a sword cultivator who aspired to reach the peak of swordsmanship, how could he miss the once-in-a-century event? Chen Pinggan subconsciously cupped his fists in return. However, it was the first time he cupped his fists in salute on the Embroidery River ferry. He was used to covering his right hand with his left hand. Now, looking at Wei Jin and the young swordsman in the Wind Snow Temple, it seemed that they were covering their right hand with their right hand. As a result, Chen Pinggan felt a little awkward. He was afraid that he did not know the rules of etiquette, so he quickly changed the position of his left and right hands. Wei Jin saw this detail. When he saw the straw sandals youth's embarrassed state, he could not help but laugh. He bent down and patted his old friend's back. Let's go. The white donkey stomped its hooves happily. After taking a few steps forward, it suddenly turned around and ran towards Chen Pinggan. It rubbed against the young man's cheek before carrying its long-awaited master on its back and continuing its journey. Along the way, it was said that Li Huai was taking care of the white donkey. However, how could Li Huai have such patience and perseverance? Wasn't it still Chen Pinggan who silently fed the donkey, blew its nose, and drove away the mosquitoes and flies? Chen Pinggan smiled and waved goodbye to the donkey. The white-clothed sword cultivator could not help but laugh. His body leaned back and moved up and down along with the donkey's hooves. Well, it turned out that this land sword immortal was not as popular as his old friend. The world was lonely, desolate, and barren. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be only a city wall of unknown length and height left. Even from 100 miles away in the south, one could still clearly see the 18 large words carved with sword chi. From this, one could see how big the words were and how tall the city wall was. Daoist techniques, vast, western heaven. The sword chi existed forever, the lightning pool important place. Qi, Dong, Chen, Meng. Hundreds of miles south of the Great Wall, a bugle horn that seemed to be able to shatter the dome of the world suddenly sounded. Countless black shadows gathered together densely. As the bugle horn sounded, bits of fire lit up and finally connected into one. If one stood at a high place in the north and looked into the distance, it would be a resplendent sea of fire. On the city wall, an old voice sounded majestically. "Raise your swords." On the city wall that had stood here for 10,000 years and was tens of thousands of miles long. In an instant, hundreds of thousands of flying swords left the city wall at the same time and flew towards the south. The sword chi was brilliant. It was like a flood breaking through a dam and pouring down. There was no greater wonder in the world than this. 129. Under the plaque of the mansion, the young swordsman habitually put his elbows on the hilt and the end of the scabbard. He didn't look lazy at all. He said softly, "Mrs. Chu." After that, he didn't say anything else. The Minister of Rites holding a lantern and the water god of Embroidery River with a green snake wrapped around his arm slowed down their breathing and stood solemnly at the same time. The ghost in the wedding dress sneered, "Why? Do you want to settle accounts with me?" The young swordsman looked up at the place where the flying sword of the Wind Snow Temple broke the sky and said slowly, "Mrs. Chu, you don't have to be angry. I don't mean that." But the children left here and the blind Taoist master and his disciples continued to go north. I hope Mrs. Chu won't cause any more trouble. Whether Mrs. Chu did it intentionally or not, the Song clan has always been grateful to Mrs. Chu. After all, she helped the Song clan to continue the dynasty. After that, the Great Li's Song clan was once again guilty to Madam Chu. Even if an outsider like me wasn't filled with righteous indignation when I heard of that tragedy, I definitely had a heart of compassion. Silence fell again. The ghost in the wedding dress raised her arm and stroked the hair on her temples, showing the gentleness of a woman. She squinted and smiled. "Next, you can say but." The young swordsman nodded and said, "But the more we delay the matter of Mrs. Chu indiscriminately killing scholars, the more we can't hide the truth, just like today. I don't dare to guess what His Majesty will think. But if I hear that a scholar has disappeared here again, I'll visit alone and bring Mrs. Chu back to Dallas Water Prison. Don't worry. His Majesty cares about friendship, but he'll definitely pay more attention to the rules. Besides, no matter how much friendship there is, it will be used up one day." The young swordsman sighed and said sincerely, "Mrs. Chu, whether you believe it or not, I don't want such a day to come." The ghost in the wedding dress looked into the distance and gently twirled the sleeves of her wedding dress with 2 fingers. She rarely had a calm state of mind and said softly, "Because you're willing to talk to a young man so humbly, I believe what you said." She paused for a long time, and her expression turned cold. "I can promise that I won't harm any passing scholar, but I want you to know that once I accidentally see those traveling scholars, I may not be able to control myself. I'm not pleading with you. I just want to tell you the truth. When the time comes, you can do whatever you want with me. Do you want me to be thrown into that water prison, or do you want me to break the water source of this place? You and I will each depend on our own abilities, and we will be responsible for the consequences." The young swordsman smiled. "Sure." The water god of the Embroidery River wanted to say something but hesitated. Before the young swordsman left, he said to the water god, "There's no need to hide. Just tell Madam Chu the truth. After so many years, Madam Chu should have known the truth long ago. Regarding this matter, if there is any responsibility, just put it on me. You don't have to worry about the imperial court blaming me." The water god cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, "Thank you, my lord. In the future, even if it's your personal matters, I will not hesitate to go through fire and water for you." The young swordsman waved his hand and left with Dr. Han. Madam Chu stood where she was, looking at the river god who was deeply trusted by the Dali imperial court with some disdain. She did not invite him into the residence as a guest, but she also did not chase him away on the spot. The water god of the embroidered river strode up the steps and sat down casually. I know you have always looked down on a rough martial artist like me, so I will make a long story short. The Lang Jun you have taken a fancy to did not betray your sincerity. It's just that the Dali Imperial Court took the overall situation into consideration. They were afraid that if you left this place, they would no longer be able to suppress the remaining fate of the holy water country led by the Chesdun Mountain. Therefore, they never told you the truth, deliberately making you misunderstand that scholar. Madame Chu's sleeves billowed, and her eyes were red. Blood kept flowing out of her eyes, but her expression was still calm. Now that things have come to this, you still want to lie to me? Do you really think I'm a 3-year-old child? Although after he left, I never went to places other than the mountains and rivers here, and I no longer went to Wamping County and Red Candle Town to enjoy the scenery of the mortal world. I'm not deaf when he went to Lakeview Academy. I passed by so many scholars, and many of them inadvertently mentioned it, so I know a lot. In the end, he fell in love with another woman. Madame Chu murmured, I know that if he fell in love with someone, it must be true love. The water god of the embroidered river looked calm. Then you should also know that as the first scholar in Dali to enter the academy with his own ability, he was set up miserably in Lakeview Academy. First, they deliberately flattered him, and then someone secretly spent a lot of money to hire the most famous brothel girl to pretend to admire his talent and make him famous. Then, they made the great scholars of the nearby dynasties deliberately treat him as a friend despite the difference in age. They also made each of his copybooks worth a lot of money. There were many other methods, which were all linked together, making him half a step away from becoming the first gentleman in Dali to be recognized by the Confucian Academy. But overnight, the world was turned upside down, and his reputation was tarnished. Someone framed him for plagiarizing poems, and that courtesan slandered him for being inhumane. Several literary masters joined forces to criticize his moral essays, calling him a hypocrite, and scolding him as the turbid current of Lakeview Academy. A great scholar who was originally in high spirits went crazy just like that. He went crazy for a long time, and this scholar who was born poor became the laughingstock of the entire Lakeview Academy. The saying that Dali was a northern barbarian became more and more true. But in the end, no one expected that he would actually wake up. At this point, the water god of the embroidered river turned to look at Madame Chu, who was in a daze. Do you know why he could wake up? Madame Chu slowly sat at the top of the stairs, and her wedding dress slowly spread out like a bright red peony. Was it your Dali Chi refinement warriors who did it? The burly man smiled, his eyes cold as he said bluntly, if Dali really wanted to do something, it should be to kill this scholar. Madame Chu's lips twitched, and she nodded. It is indeed harmful to the country's prestige. In the battle between two countries, it's only logical that they would resort to any means possible. The man let out a turbid breath. The reason why that scholar could wake up was because a woman he was familiar with went to his side. Madame Chu's body stiffened. The water god slowly got up and walked down the stairs. That woman's face was covered with a mask, and her appearance was exactly the same as yours, Madame Chu. If I'm not wrong, Madame Chu's voice, habits, and preferences have all been copied by her. If you say that tricking the scholar before involved the battle between two countries, then forcing the scholar to a dead end and playing with him in the palm of your hand, I'm afraid it was a battle between the scholars. The water god strode away. In short, after that scholar knew the truth, he jumped into the lake and died. It's that simple. According to the words that this scholar had with his two best friends at the Directorate of Dallas Capital before he went to Lakeview Academy, he had long known of your inhuman identity. That was why he insisted on becoming a gentleman above the sages of the Confucian sect. In this way, when he returned to Dali in the future, he would have the confidence to ask the imperial court for a legal marriage. The water god had already left. The female ghost in the wedding dress, who had committed countless crimes, was still sitting in the same place. Her expression was serene, and her movements were gentle. She smoothed and folded here and there, and she was never tired of it. Not long after the Wei and Jin dynasties left, a hurried shout came from behind Chen Pingan, asking his benefactor to stop. He turned around and saw the blind old Taoist and his 2 disciples chasing after them. The old Taoist had been through a lot, and he certainly knew that this group of children of unknown origin was the key to safely leaving the mountain. Who knew if that eccentric ghost would regret her words and capture them to wash their faces and hearts? According to the 2 disciples, many scholars were planted in the mansion's garden. It seemed that someone had struggled to climb out of the soil. Now it seemed that it was a pitiful person who had been cut in half at the waist. The old Taoist was supported by the round-faced girl and ran all the way. His old Taoist robe was full of barbs on both sides of the grass and trees, but he did not notice it at all. It could be said that he was in a mess. To be honest, although the old Taoist's thunder method could not suppress the female ghost in the wedding dress, he was actually an old immortal in the marketplace at the foot of the mountain. On this trip to the north, he was often worshipped as an otherworldly master. In the 3 Branches Mountain, he was regarded as a swindler with poor skills. After all, it was a rare and bleak situation. The old Taoist no longer pretended to be mysterious like when they first met. He squeezed out a smile and asked, "May I ask where the great sword immortal Wei of the Wind Snow Temple is? My common name is Shuingzhen, and my Taoist name is Shen Guzi. I have admired the great sword immortal Wei for a long time. This time, it was a blessing in disguise. I was able to meet great sword immortal Wei and witness the 3 sword moves of the immortal with my own eyes. It is really a great blessing for me." Lin Shuyi sneered and said, "This earth sword immortal has gone to the north alone. If you want to get close to him, you can go ahead of us. Maybe you can catch up with him." The old Taoist smiled embarrassedly and said, "Let it be. Fate has not arrived, so I can't force it." The old Taoist knew that Wei Jin was an immortal in the upper 5 states who was like a hidden dragon. If he really met the sword cultivator of the Wind Snow Temple, he was afraid that he would not be able to get any benefits except being annoying. Compared to the common people at the foot of the mountain, the Qi cultivators on the mountain were certainly rare. However, it was true that the encounter between cultivators was fate. However, there were good and evil fates, and there were good and bad karma. The old Taoist had been subduing demons and devils all the way to accumulate good karma for himself. After 40 to 50 fights, he was still alive today. It was not only because he had the cultivation of the 5th states of Qi cultivators and the unorthodox thunder method that he had relied on. Seeing that there was an awkward silence, the old Taoist hurriedly looked around and said with a smile, "Xiao Ju little cripple, kowtow to your benefactors and thank them." The round-faced girl was about to kneel down after hearing the words, but the crippled boy, who was holding a banner full of mud, looked gloomy. Chen Pinggan quickly stepped forward and gently pulled the skinny girl's arm. He said with a smile, "No need, no need." Then Chen Pinggan said to the crippled boy, "Thank you for your reminder on the mountain road." The crippled boy was stunned and blushed for the first time. For a moment, he stammered and did not know how to answer. In the end, he simply turned his head away. The boy had faced the ghost in the wedding dress on the path and fought with her in close combat. Although there was a big gap between their cultivation, his momentum was not weak at all. He did not expect that he was such a shy boy. The old Taoist was pleasantly surprised. After kicking the crippled boy, he pretended to be angry and said, "You're not worthy of being shown in public." Then the old Taoist said in a low voice, "My benefactors, after you leave the mountain, head south. It will take about a day and a half to pass by Sanji Mountain. Remember not to travel at night. There is a malicious ghost that uses the tomb as its nest. It steals the blessed land and absorbs the ancestral yin aura of a family. Otherwise, according to the fortune-telling, the family's grandchild should have been a high-ranking official in their previous life. The malevolent ghost's cultivation is not weak. It should have the strength of a 4th realm Qi refinement warrior. The main reason is that it appears and disappears unpredictably and is very difficult to capture. It also uses some kind of unknown evil dharma to create more than 10 yin corpse puppets. I have fought with it before and failed several times. Not only did I waste several precious thunder talismans, I was also mistaken by the local villagers as a swindler. It is really infuriating. Lin Shuyi's heart was slightly moved. He heard the secret reminder of the senior Yin Shen and asked, "Taoist, are you good at the five thunder spell? May I know which sect you belong to?" The old Taoist was a little embarrassed. He thought that this cold boy was really inexperienced and did not know the rules of the Jianghu. Who would ask someone's background so directly? No matter if he was a celestial cultivator in the mountain or a martial artist in the Jianghu, this was a big taboo. However, with the pitiful experience of his fellow sufferers and the help of the landsword immortal like Wei Jin, the old Taoist did not care about this. After careful consideration, he slowly said, "It's a long story. My benefactors, please don't mind my nagging. My hometown is the famous Southern Stream Kingdom, where Taoism is respected. There is a Taoist sect at the border, which is the leader of the Aquarius Continent's Taoist sect. It occupies one of the 72 blessed lands, Qingtan Blessed Land. Not to mention that the sect leader is the imperial tutor of the Southern Stream Kingdom. Due to the profoundness of his Taoism and his great magical powers, the kings of several nearby countries have personally come to the mountain to worship the sect leader as the #1 immortal of the country. Therefore, this Taoist immortal has the title of Immortal of the Four Countries and is recognized as one of the top 10 immortal masters in the Aquarius continent. To be honest, if the great sword immortal Wei of the Wind Snow Temple met this immortal master before he broke through the realm, Senior Wei would not be able to be on equal footing with him. Chen Pinggan and Lin Shuyi listened very seriously, not wanting to miss a word. There is always someone better than you. Especially the words immortal. Wasn't Liu Zhimao, who appeared in the small town, known as the immortal master Jiang Jie? Li Baoping and Li Huai, on the other hand, were not so focused. Li Baoping looked at the round-faced little girl from time to time. The latter timidly hid beside the blind Taoist, looking shy and shy. The blind old Taoist became more and more interested. With the help of Xiao Ju'er, he unknowingly walked between Chen Pinggan and Lin Shuyi and said, "In the world, the sects that are qualified to have the word sect are generally divided into 3 sects, Ancestor, Orthodox, and Lower Sect. Among them, Ancestor is often called the ancestral court. The Lower Sect will have many affiliated sects. The names of these sects are not so particular. As long as they do not use the word sect without permission and do not have the same name as other sects, such as Taoist temples, Buddhist temples, and so on, they can be named casually. Periodically, they will give some tribute to the lower sect and build a good relationship with the imperial court at the foot of the mountain. They will find a place with good feng shui and cultivate peacefully in the mountain. They will try their best to recruit disciples with cultivation aptitude and pass down the flame for hundreds and thousands of years. This humble Daoist came from the truth-seeking temple, and it was once one of the top-ranked large sects in the Southern Stream Kingdom. But it fell into decline over 100 years ago, and when it came to this humble Daoist generation, almost all of my masters and seniors had passed away. Not many of my senior and junior brothers were left, and there wasn't a single one of them who was truly promising. The Five Thunders cultivation method of our truth-seeking sect is indeed not orthodox. It mainly cultivates the 2 qi acupoints of the liver and gallbladder. The knowledge is all about the 2 words Shi and He, which are derived from the meaning of Shi is clouds and rain, and He is thunder. Once it is cultivated, you can see that in several important qi acupoints, there are mysterious scenes of clouds and rain rising and thunder rumbling. Then, you can resonate with heaven and earth. Raising your hand or raising your foot, you can attract the heavenly thunder and expel evil spirits. Of course, in front of the Great Sword Immortal Wei's Great Sword Immortal, this unorthodox cultivation method of the truth-seeking sect can only be a joke. Lin Shuyi frowned and asked, "The 5 viscera are the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys. The 5 places gather qi like 5 thunders. Why did your sect cultivate the gallbladder outside of the 5 viscera as the place to attract thunder?" The embarrassment on the blind Daoist's face this time was absolutely not fake. He sighed heavily, and his face was filled with exhaustion as he said helplessly, "I really had no choice. The 5 thunders technique is a secret technique of the orthodox Daoist technique. To put it bluntly, even if an outsider obtained the complete cultivation technique, who would dare to cultivate it without permission? The truth-seeking sect mainly cultivates the two related qi acupoints of the liver and gallbladder. In fact, even if it is the liver, it is only because of a chance encounter that the founder has learned a little bit. In the end, it is barely similar in form, but not in spirit. This is the root of why there are so few orthodox cultivation methods in the world and so many unorthodox cultivation methods. Lin Shuyi suddenly understood and said, "I see." The old Taoist sighed from the bottom of his heart and said, "It is more than 1,000 times harder to walk on the Great Tao than this muddy mountain road. It is precisely because my sect is not the orthodox cultivation method of thunder that there are advantages and disadvantages when I cultivate it. For example, once the yin-yang cultivation method of thunder reveals the secrets of heaven, it is easy to be punished by the invisible heaven. My sect cultivates this thunder method and usually chooses disciples with congenital defects to join my sect. Because these people are pitted by the way of heaven, even if they frequently use the truth-seeking thunder method of thunder that hurts the origin of the liver and gallbladder, it is not an extravagant hope for them to attain Tao and live a long life if they are lucky. Legend has it that once the qi cultivators of the orthodox cultivation method of thunder of a big continent take action, the god of thunder, the goddess of lightning, the rain master, the wind master, the cloud official, and all kinds of gods will be driven to help boost the momentum. Think about it, after such a great effort is launched, how can the mountains and rivers not change color? Speaking of these things that were completely unrelated to him, the blind Taoist's face was full of spirit, and there was no trace of discouragement. This was probably one of the reasons why cultivation was as difficult as ascending to heaven, but people still flocked to it. Once one embarked on the path of cultivation and walked on the bridge of longevity, one would have seen or heard of the beautiful scenery at the top of the mountain. One could live a long life, no spells, summon the wind and rain, move mountains and seas, and all kinds of unimaginable magnificent scenery could be expected. In this way, who would be willing to hang around at the foot of the mountain? The old man sighed and said, "My two disciples and I have relied on each other for survival these years. We have traveled everywhere, subdued demons and devils, and caught ghosts and exorcised evil. We have done a lot of things, and we also collect money. There is no other way. Cultivation also requires money. The Bridge of Longevity built is the biggest money-squandering place in the world. Even if there are evil spirits causing trouble in the noble families, I have no connections and no one to recommend me. Of course, I have no chance to enter. As for the water and land Taoist temples opened by the local rich people, they only invite the famous local monks and old Taoists. They do not trust outsiders. My sect's thunder method, which I am good at, can't scare the ordinary people and prove that I am not a liar. So, I have to end up like this. If I succeed in catching demons, I may not be able to earn much money. But if I fail, I must be unable to make ends meet. It is not easy to cultivate." As they walked, they talked. When they woke up, it turned out that they had already walked out of the cage-like kernel. They did not know whether it was an illusion or not, but they all felt that it had returned to the original beautiful scenery, and there was no previous gloomy and cold atmosphere. In the end, Chen Pinggan found that even if the blind Taoist did not speak, he did not mean to leave. He was still going south with them. He could not help but ask, "Taoist priest, aren't you going north?" The old Taoist laughed and said, "It is just a little delay. It is okay. I can't repay you for saving my life. Just take it as me taking my two disciples to see you off. It is nothing more than a small matter of walking a few more steps." After that, the two groups of people walked together. There was no wind or rain along the way, and everything went smoothly. When they completely walked out of the boundary of the mountains and rivers, the blind old Taoist's tensed heartstrings finally relaxed. He casually found a place by the roadside and sat down. The round-faced girl nicknamed Ju quickly handed him a kettle. The lame boy stood behind the old Taoist and looked back at the mountains. No one knew what he was thinking. When they were about to leave, the old Taoist took out a well-preserved scroll from his bag. It was made of silk and handed it to Chen Pinggan. "This is a scroll passed down from my sect. There are almost 100 kinds of mountain ghosts depicted on it for reference. This is the first time you are traveling to study, so you will definitely pass through many mountains. Maybe it will be useful in the future. I have already memorized it by heart, and it is only a little bit of souvenir value left. It is better to give it to you. Things have their uses, so it is useful. Lin Shuyi pulled Chen Ping'an's sleeve. The latter understood and accepted the scroll. However, Chen Ping'an also took out the remaining snake gallstone and gave it to the lame boy. He only said that it was a local product of his hometown. It was not valuable, but there was not much of it. The lame boy wanted to refuse, but the blind Taoist hurriedly asked him to accept it, saying that it was his benefactor's kindness. The lame boy, who was extremely introverted, had to accept it silently. He wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he was too embarrassed to say the word thank you. Chen Ping'an finally smiled and said, "After you pass Red Candle Town and Chiduan Mountain, you can go to the Kaochu or the New Year shop and find a girl named Wan Xiu. Show her this snake gall stone and she will know that you are my friends. Maybe she can help you settle down in the town. When I reach the nearest post station, I will send a letter back to the town to explain everything." After that, the two sides parted ways. The blind Taoist would rather take his two disciples and take a long detour than walk into the mountains and rivers. As they continued to go south, Chen Ping'an looked back and slowly withdrew his gaze. The boy suddenly wanted to practice swordsmanship. 130. Strangers meeting by chance in the river of life would often go their separate ways after a whirlwind. The blind old Daoist named Shen Guzi was silent all the way, which made Jua a little uncomfortable. Although the crippled youth was unwilling to hand over the snake gall stone, after hesitating, he still took the initiative to hand it to his bad-tempered master. The old Daoist took the fine stone and rubbed it in his palm for a moment. Then, he returned it to the youth for the first time. "Keep it for yourself." The crippled youth took the stone in confusion and looked at Jua. The latter also shook her head quietly, indicating that she could not guess her master's thoughts. The old man said softly, "Little cripple, this is your fate. Master can't take it away. If I really take it, it won't be a good thing." Why do you think that young man named Chen Ping'an sent a letter back to Longquan County through the post house? I reckon that if we go to that Tai Sui or Kaochu shop, and it's not you who personally takes out the stone, our days there won't be easy. We might not be troubled by others, but we won't be able to gain a foothold smoothly, let alone find a mountain and cultivate under someone else's roof. The crippled youth nodded. He was not a person with a complicated mind and was not good at thinking about these problems. The blind old Daoist rubbed the little girl's head. "The two of you are really lucky." Compared to her brother, Jua was more meticulous. She asked, "Master, is the background of the little sister's group unusual?" The old Daoist nodded and said that Longquan County was originally the Dragon Pearl Grotto heaven above the Dali dynasty. After it shattered, it took root. Previously, the scholarly sage, Qi Jingchun, was in charge for 60 years. Now, these children are carrying bookcases, and each one is smarter than the other. They said that they are going to the Great Sui Kingdom's academy to travel. Then, whose students do you think they are? The little girl was a little envious. The scholarly sage students are really amazing. The blind old Daoist sneered and said, "Otherwise, the first thing that Wei Jin, the sword immortal of the Wind Snow Temple, would be to come and save them. Besides, these children have a yin spirit as their retainer, and they can actually threaten the mountain and water source of that fierce female ghost. None of these children are easy to deal with." The old man sighed. "Their future is limitless, limitless." The little girl was a little slow and asked curiously, "Since Master knows that they have experts protecting them, why do you have to tell them about the situation of the 3 branches of mountain? They don't have to worry." The old Daoist habitually reached out and pinched the little girl's cheeks. He smiled and said, "Silly girl, this is called benefit without cost. You can be a good person without spending a single copper coin. Why not? 2. All these years, I've always wanted to pick up a heavenly treasure and casually pick up a talented disciple from the side of the road. I've always despised the two of you for not having a good background and not having a good background. Unexpectedly, when I look back, I'm the one who's in the dark." The little girl was a little scared. The old daoist was too strange. Her face turned pale. Master, are you possessed? Jua doesn't recognize you. The old daoist laughed and suddenly said in a low voice, Jua, I promised not to take the talisman spring for a year. Now, I want to discuss it with you and change it from a year to half a year. What do you think? Think about it. Master's mission of subduing the demon is really one step higher than the demon. Not only did I beat up that female ghost, but I also lost 4 words on the banner and gave away a painting that was passed down by my ancestors. As disciples, don't you feel sorry for your master and show some filial piety? The little girl was relieved. This was the master she was familiar with. So, she said directly, half a year it is. The lame boy carefully put away the stone and said in a muffled voice, the stone is already mine. The blind old daoist was angry and scolded, you can't change a dog's habit. The little girl covered her mouth and laughed. The little cripple also laughed. In a secluded area, the yin spirit revealed his true form. However, his face was still blurry, and his body was shrouded in black smoke. He spoke with a hoarse voice, I wasn't able to protect you, and even caused you to be taken to the female ghost's residence. I'm sorry. Chen Pinggan really didn't know how to comfort him. After a long time, he said, it's good that you did your best. The yin spirit smiled bleakly. No matter what, I can't absolve myself from the blame this time. Especially because I was greedy for personal cultivation, I caused you to fall into such a situation. I really feel guilty. If something happened to you, even if I destroyed the mountain root and water source and died with the female ghost, it would have no meaning. Li Baoping said with a smile, when I was young, my big brother liked to tell me some strange things. Once, he told me a story about Lord Xing Wang. He said that the way to judge the merits is different. I remember it very clearly. It's called if you want to do good, you won't be rewarded. If you don't want to do evil, you won't be punished. There is a limit to human strength. If you do your best and do your best, you don't have to feel guilty. Otherwise, it's tiring to be a human and a ghost. The yin spirit was speechless. Being taught the truth by a little girl, even if she showed the aura of a gentleman before, it was still a little awkward. The little girl fell into her own world again. She was a little annoyed. She punched her palm with her fist. Big brother always said these strange things. At that time, I just listened to it as an interesting story. If I had known, I would have paid more attention. Chen Pinggan wanted to say something but stopped. The yin spirit looked at Chen Pinggan and said with a smile, can we talk alone? Chen Pinggan nodded and let Lin Shuyi and the other 2 go first. The yin spirit waited until Lin Shuyi and the others were about half a mile away. He said, I was arranged by old Yang of the medicine shop to protect Li Huai. Chen Pinggan scratched his head. I thought you were here to protect Bao Ping or Lin Shuyi. The yin spirit said with a smile, Li Huai's father, Li almost killed the vassal king, Song Jianqiang. He is very powerful. Once, Li went to old man Yang and told him that his wife had been bullied by someone. He wanted to leave the mountain and settle the score with that family's ancestor. He had to leave the Pearl Grotto heaven. Old man Yang couldn't resist and had to agree. In the end, I heard that there was an immortal sect in Baoping continent. Li used his fist to destroy the ancestral hall, and he fought all the way from the foot of the mountain to the top. Chen Pinggan's mouth was wide open. Didn't they say that Li was the most useless man in the west of the town? Even his son, Li Huai, always thought so. Chen Pinggan asked curiously, why didn't Li tell Li Huai? The yin spirit seemed to be in a better mood after mentioning Li Li's temper is very stubborn. Otherwise, he would not have married Li Huai's mother. Chen Pinggan laughed heartily. When he knows the truth, Li Huai will be very happy. The yin spirit asked, you don't plan to tell Li Huai? At Pillow Inn, you told Bao Ping the truth directly, even if Alliance advised you not to tell her. Chen Pinggan walked forward slowly. When it is about me, I think it is right. Of course, I can make my own decision. But Li Huai's father did not want to tell his son. As an outsider, what right do I have to tell Li Huai the truth? Is it because I think Li Huai will be happier? That is not good. The yin spirit nodded. No wonder Li did not think highly of the other geniuses. Instead, he thought highly of this young man from Mud Bottle Alley. He did not hesitate to break the rules and wanted to give the golden carp and the dragon king basket to Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan suddenly stopped and asked, "Because I have good eyesight and I was worried that you were a bad person. I remember very clearly that when you first appeared, the first person you looked at was me. Then, you looked at Li Huai. Why was that? Was it just an unintentional move? If you are not willing to answer, you can pretend that I did not ask." If the yin spirit was still alive, his mouth would be dry and he would be sitting on pins and needles. How could he have imagined that Chen Pinggan would be so meticulous? At that time, his gaze had flashed and disappeared. He had hidden it quite well. But when he thought of Chen Pinggan's performance along the way, the yin spirit understood. This was probably the reason why Chen Pinggan was able to convince everyone. Even if Lin Shuyi was now in the middle 5 realms and had become a true immortal, Li Baoping would not listen to him. Li Huai was the same. As for the yin spirit himself, he was not an exception. In his eyes, Lin Shuyi was still an extremely intelligent and talented young man. This feeling was very strange. It was as if the young man from Mud Bottle Alley had a temperament that made people feel at ease and at ease. If the young man said that this was not right, then the others in the group would feel that it was not right. If the young man said that this could be done, then it could be done. But what was even stranger was that the young man had never deliberately shown off any of his strengths. On the contrary, he would humbly ask the little girl who called him Little Martial Uncle about how to read and read. He had never even treated Li Huai as an insensible child. He was also willing to chat with Lin Shuyi and listen to the latter talk about the outside world. The yin spirit finally smiled. "I will not answer this question first. Anyway, you do not need to worry, I will not harm you." Chen Pinggan jogged forward, turning his head and smiling. "If I did not believe you, I would not have asked this question." The yin spirit's figure slowly faded away, sighing. Traveling with this group of children was really tiring. Actually, that servant girl Zhu Lu, who had a terrible temperament, could be considered a genius that could not be underestimated in an ordinary family of the Mountain Foot dynasty. Unfortunately, in this group, she was left in the dust from start to finish. She could not even compare to a single person in any aspect. Further south, there was the Longshu River and the Tiefu River, followed by the Xiuhua River and the Chongdan River. There was more water than mountains. But for the next day and a half, it was as if the water transportation had been used up. It was difficult to even find a mountain stream. Actually, there was water, but it was all stagnant water that could not be drunk. Most of them were sickly willow seedlings. They were not tall nor lush, and most of them were crooked. Along the way, flying insects flew everywhere, making people feel uncomfortable. Li Huai was a little afraid because the blind old Taoist with the crow's mouth said that they would soon pass through a ghostly place called Mount Sanji. There were evil spirits and some yin corpses as the evil spirits' minions. At the thought of this, Li Huai was depressed. His painted puppets and clay figurines were too small. Even if they were alive, their fighting ability would still be weak. Moreover, the 5 clay figurines given by the white-robed sword immortal could not be revived no matter how he warmed them. Could it be that the white-robed sword immortal was a liar? He did not want to give him good things, but he could not put down his pride as a sword immortal, so he deliberately gave him a big pie in the sky. At dusk, Chen Pinggan stopped to set up a stove to cook. Li Huai, who was familiar with the place, ran over to pick up a large handful of dried branches. Then, he squatted at the side and complained to Chen Pinggan, "Chen Pinggan, I think the Wei and Jin temples of Wind Snow are not as good as our house." Chen Pinggan ignored him. Li Huai went to his bookcase and took out a painted puppet and a clay figurine. He used the puppet to bully the little clay figurine holding a sword and made the latter kneel and beg for mercy, shouting, "Lady Ghost, please spare my life. I, Wei Jin, know my mistake." Chen Pinggan did not know whether to laugh or cry. He could only explain, "Wei Jin is a very good person." Li Huai rolled his eyes and moved his hands, continuing to let the painted puppet trample on the clay figurine. Lin Shuyi sat on a rock not far away and was flipping through the painting. He looked up and said, "If I'm not wrong, Wei Jin seems to look down on you, or rather, he thinks the least of you." Li Baoping, who was silently packing the small bookcase, was furious. "There's such a thing." Chen Pinggan squatted on the ground and slowly lit the firewood. He squatted down and prepared to cook. "What does looking down on me have to do with whether he is a good person or not?" Li Huai was shocked. "Chen Pinggan, what are you thinking? How can someone who looks down on me be a good person? He's definitely not a good person." Chen Pinggan started to get busy in an orderly manner. He said to himself, "Wei Jin is such a powerful person and is called a sword immortal of the land. But when he speaks to us, he is still polite and is willing to reason with us children. Do you think all the immortals on the mountain are like this? That's not it. Before I left the town, I met more than one immortal who killed people based on their mood and reason." The youth casually talked about the murderous past and did not want to say more. He continued, "If you want people to think highly of you, you have to rely on yourself. You have to do well in farming and burning porcelain. You have the greatest strength when you go into the mountains to chop firewood and burn charcoal. You have to fight in the alleys for water and not be afraid of being beaten. If you dare to charge in front, you will naturally be thought highly of." Chen Pinggan looked at them. "This is our hometown. In the future, when Bao Ping goes to the college of the Great Sui Kingdom, if she is good in her studies, and Lin Shuyi, who has become a Qi refinement warrior at a young age, of course, people will think highly of her. As for you, Li Huai, you can talk about it when you are older. There's no hurry now." Li Huai was anxious. "Chen Pinggan, you are not anxious, but I am." Chen Pinggan asked, "You wake up early every day to practice the stances with me. Are you able to wake up early?" Li Huai did not hesitate. "Of course I can't." Chen Pinggan asked again, "Then I'll teach you the stances of the sword furnace." Li Huai had a look of disdain. "What's the point of learning that? I'm so young." Chen Pinggan said helplessly, "Now you know that you are young. Then why were you so anxious with me in the beginning?" Li Huai was dumbfounded. He thought for a long time but still did not have an answer. In the end, when everyone was sitting around to eat, Li Huai picked up a piece of pickled vegetable. After a big mouthful of rice, he asked, "Do you think there is a shortcut in the world that can be achieved overnight? For example, if you practice it today, you can become a god tomorrow?" Alliance said that there isn't. If I had known, I would have asked him before Wei Jin left. What if Alliance doesn't have it, but he does? Then I would have struck it rich. This time, when I go to the Great Sui Kingdom to study, I will step on a flying sword. Whoosh, 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 back and forth. I will be faster than Chen Pinggan's stances. I will be like the wind. You guys can just follow behind me and eat my dust." Li Baoping asked with a straight face, "Who's eating the dust?" Li Huai swallowed his saliva and looked at Lin Shuyi. Then, he silently turned to look at Chen Pinggan. In the end, Li Huai was a little sad. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration. He quickly picked up the painted puppet from the ground. "It eats. She is now an A-ranked general under my command. There's nothing I can do about it. They're the biggest, the prettiest, and the most experienced. They've followed me, Li Huai, to conquer the world for the longest period of time. After that, the 5 dirty little clay figurines can only be ranked up to B, C, D, and V." Lin Shuyi smiled and asked, "What about the little things in that book?" Li Huai shook his head and said, "Them? I don't like them very much." Li Baoping's words hit the nail on the head. "It's because you don't like to read. You don't like to see them because you need to open the book first." Li Huai looked like he didn't hear what she said clearly. Chen Pinggan looked up at the slightly tall Mount Sanji in the distance and asked, "After passing Mount Sanji, we will reach the market in the town. Do you want to buy anything?" Li Baoping said excitedly, "Junior uncle, I want to buy some miscellaneous books." Mr. Qi said that the various schools of thought outside of Confucianism all have their own classics. "We can read more." Mr. Qi said that the stones of other mountains can be used to improve the jade. Chen Pinggan, "If possible, I want to buy a set of chess. The cheapest one will do." Li Huai, "What about you? Give me money and I won't buy anything, okay? I want to save it. My mother taught me that as long as I have money, I won't panic. Chen Pinggan asked, "What do you think?" Li Huai chuckled and said, "I'm just trying my luck." "What if you, Chen Pinggan, find your conscience?" Chen Pinggan chuckled. Li Huai's smile froze and he quickly changed the topic. "Didn't that old Taoist tell us not to go to Mount Sanji when it's dark?" Lin Shuyi shook his head and said, "I've discussed with Chen Pinggan and Senior Yin Shen. If we travel at night and the malicious spirit comes out to hurt us, we will suppress it. At first, Senior Yin Shen will not do anything. He will let me attack first and try to use the talisman and thunder magic to repel the enemy. The main thing is to let me gain some experience. If the malicious spirit hides and doesn't come out, then forget it and we will continue our journey." As night fell, the group slowly climbed up the mountain. Mount Sanji was not high, but the terrain was gentle and the slope was very big. Chen Pinggan purposely took a detour. There were a lot of unmarked graves on the mountain. Of course, there were more graves where the descendants paid their respects. They were clean and tidy. There were tombstones with words on the tombstones. Some paper money that was not completely burned were scattered in front of the tombstones. In less than 2 hours, they had crossed Mount Sanji. Other than the slightly cold night wind, there was nothing strange. Lin Shuyi felt a little regretful, but he would not force anything. After that, the journey to Yefu Pass at the border of Dali was even smoother. After passing by a small town market, Li Baoping bought 5 or 6 books. There were travel books, Buddhist scriptures, and literary notes. Lin Shuyi bought a set of chess. After teaching Chen Pinggan the rules, they often played chess whenever they were free. Li Baoping could not sit still and wanted to throw 7 or 8 chess pieces on the chessboard in one go. She also complained that Lin Shuyi played chess too slowly. As for Li Huai, he was simply too lazy to use his brain. However, the one who played chess with Lin Shuyi the most was the Yin Shen. Li Huai probably spent nearly 10 taels of silver to buy a lousy book in Red Candle Town. This time, he did not buy anything. Although Chen Pinggan wanted to practice swordsmanship, other than occasionally taking out the scholarwood sword from his basket, he did not really start practicing swordsmanship. In Chen Pinggan's view, the most important thing was to practice martial art. He would practice swordsmanship when he felt that he could divert his attention to other things. Chen Pinggan had only practiced a small part of the method that Alliance taught him. At the 6th stop, he could not go on. Although he could not practice swordsmanship for the time being, Alliance said that 18 stops was something that many sword cultivators had to go through untold hardships to figure out. Diligently practicing 18 stops could be considered as building a good foundation for future swordsmanship. When Chen Pinggan thought of this, he felt full of motivation and strength. Whenever he had free time, he would either sit on the branches of a big tree on a mountain peak or at the edge of a cliff near the water. There were youths who formed hand seals and stood alone, silently cultivating while facing the mountains and rivers. When there was a mountain, he looked at the mountain. When there was water, he listened to the water. (131) The county magistrate of Longquan County, Wu Yuan, left the Li family's mansion on Fulu Street with a trusted secretary. Wu Yuan, who was dressed in official attire, suddenly stood on one leg. He bent down and took off his boots, then poured out the gravel inside. The secretary, who was born in an aristocratic family, was not surprised by this. However, Fulu Street was much more lively than before. The young man, who was still an official for the time being, immediately tried his best to cover up for his superior. At the same time, he said softly, Li Hong had clearly relented earlier and was willing to take the lead to compromise on the matter of the immortal tomb. Why did he suddenly change his mind? Isn't he afraid of leaving an impression on you that he's two-faced? Wu Yuan, who looked tired, said helplessly, it's most likely Li Hong's second son, Li Baozhen, who has made a name for himself in the capital. Perhaps he has already found a backer and sent a secret letter back home, warning Li Hong not to act rashly. Or perhaps it's his eldest son, who lives in seclusion, who reminded Li Hong to act quietly. It's hard to say. In short, we're the ones in trouble now. There's no other way. The original arrangement was mostly based on my master. Sigh, let's not talk about it. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Let's drink. Let's have 2 pots of peach blossom wine first. It's my treat and you'll pay. Just put it on young Master Fu's tab. The secretary with the surname Fu was already numb to the fact that his superior was taking credit. He only asked curiously, rumor has it that the 2 sons and 1 daughter of the Li family on Fulu Street were once told by a certain fortune-teller that they were dragons and phoenixes? Wu Yuan rubbed her slightly pale and thin cheeks and said casually with a smile, "You believe in these things? In the capital of Dali, if one wants to stand out, especially those who came from humble beginnings, who doesn't have some unique experience in raising the prestige of famous scholars and accumulating reputation? Even if it's a rich family, how good can it be? Your Fu family's saying of splendid and dazzling lineups, whether or not there's any exaggeration in it, outsiders may not know, but don't you, Fu Yu, know in your heart?" Fu Yu, who was exposed, said angrily, "Lord Wu, you have the nerve to talk about our Fu family." Wu Yuan's mood turned for the better. She laughed and patted her best friend's shoulder. "Let's stick together and play dirty." Fu Yu laughed as well. Like-minded and like-minded. Doesn't that sound better? Wu Yuan laughed and scolded, "Aren't you being too pretentious? It's very tiring to be a hypocrite, but it's much more fun to be a real person." Fu Yu shook his head and said regretfully, "Lord Wu, your words have gone with the flow." Wu Yuan sighed and changed the subject. "I miss my daughter-in-law a little." Fu Yu smiled and said, "County Magistrate, shouldn't we release the restrictive spells on the brothels in Longquan County? Wine, 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 it's unreasonable to only have wine." Wu Yuan nodded and said in all seriousness, "Among those exiled felons of the Lu dynasty, there are some women who just happen to fit the bill. Instead of dying in the arduous labor deep in the mountains and forests, why don't we give them another choice? Of course, this matter cannot be forced. The key is still up to them. Fu Yu, from now on, you don't have to accompany me to eat supercilious people every day. You'll be personally in charge of this matter." This time, it was Fu Yu's turn to be surprised. He had just casually mentioned it earlier, and now he asked doubtfully, "Really?" Wu Yuan tugged at the collar of her official uniform and said with a smile, "What's there to be serious about? So many mountains have been opened up, and in the future, most of the immortals living on the mountains will be living in immortal mansions. If we want to keep these men with high standards and fat wallets and let them spend a fortune in our small town, do we have to rely on a lowly county magistrate like me who's about to lose his position as supervisor, or do we have to rely on you, Fu Yu? In the past, according to my master's tone, those arrogant people living on the mountains often have no interest in the so-called beauty of the women of the mortal world, because compared to the immortals who cultivate the Tao, there's a huge difference in their appearance. Then, the only thing left for the women at the foot of the mountains is their status. For example, a golden branch jade leaf whose country has fallen, or a daughter of a wealthy clan whose property has been confiscated, is more or less tempting. This is something that the felons of the Lu dynasty do not lack. Fu Yu said indignantly, "At this time, the imperial court has the intention to use the new supervisor of kill affairs. If it's not picking fruits, what is it? For the past 2 months, my lord, you've walked step by step through more than 60 mountains and talked with those old foxes until your mouth was dry. From the groundbreaking of the county yamen to the city god pavilion, to the negotiation of the location of the civil and martial temples, to the preparation of the timber, to the resettlement of the Lu dynasty's survivors, you've done everything in detail. When have you ever slept for more than 6 hours? Well, if the old men of the imperial court just talked, then does it mean that Lord Wu is really incompetent? Perhaps the 4 families and 10 clans are making things difficult for you at the behest of someone in the imperial court. They deliberately want my lord's official career to start in Longquan County and end in Longquan County." Fu Yu probably felt that the last statement was too unlucky and unrealistic, so he said sullenly, "At the very least, they want my lord to be unable to successfully take charge of a department before the age of 50, and have to rely on the endure formula to slowly climb to a high position in the department. Wu Yuan opened her cracked lips, but in the end, she didn't say anything. Fu Yu suddenly laughed. Wu Yuan turned her head and looked over. What happy thing are you thinking of? Fu Yu nodded and said, this Longquan County is small, but compared to the bustling capital, I still like this place. Soju, pastries, and the meat buns every morning, as long as I want to eat, I can walk over and buy them myself. A round trip takes at most an hour. Sometimes, when my mind is in a mess, I'll sit at a wine shop and order a catty of loose wine. I, Fu Yu, can sit there quietly for 2 hours, and no one will come over and call for young Master Fu. Then, I'll order a small bowl of soy sauce meat and a plate of pickled vegetables. I really want to continue living like this. Therefore, right now, I want to make some achievements here even more. No matter how difficult it is, I'm not afraid. Wu Yuan grunted in agreement. If one can only lie down and enjoy life, and be supported by others, then what's the point of being an official? One has to do something for the common people in a down-to-earth manner. You're stronger than me. Because I was born in poverty, I know that the common people and rural villagers don't have it easy. You're the noble young master of the Fu clan, and I'm very surprised that you can think this way. The two of them walked side by side. Fu Yu said helplessly, but here's the problem. Even if you do something useful, the common people might not necessarily think highly of you. In the history books, there are plenty of capable officials who made progress in their respective areas, but in the end, they were reduced to curses and had to leave with their tails between their legs. How many hundreds of years later, the court finally realized that all they passed down was a few poems that sang the praises of virtue. What's the use of that? Wu Yuan shook her head and said, it's not right to think this way. Doing something is just doing something. Your original intention was to do something that made you feel particularly proud. As for whether the common people would appreciate it or not, and whether the court would approve of it, you don't have to think about these things right now. If you think too much, you'll only bring trouble to yourself. One wrong thought, and you might even lose your will to fight. Our Confucian school is different from the Daoist school, which pursues the highest level of Taoism, and is different from the Buddhist school, which pursues the highest level of Buddhism. Fu Yu sighed. Wu Yuan seemed to be talking to herself. Among the 3 schools of thought, the Daoist school is particular about tranquility. It's a matter of one's self. If the heavens fall and the earth rends, I'll be able to live forever. That's enough. It doesn't pay attention to the previous life or the next life. Instead, it cares about this body in this life, because it's necessary to rely on this body to attain Tao and complete the bridge of longevity. Legend has it that Buddhism is divided into big and small sects. The small ones are similar to the Daoist school, while the big ones tell the common people that the sufferings of this life and the blessings of the next life are very important. Only our Confucian school is the closest to the secular world, and we're the most deeply entangled. We're also faced with the predicament of not being inferior to those who are close, but resenting those who are far away. The greater one's knowledge, the higher one's cultivation, the more restrained one's actions are. We always feel that if we stretch out one's leg or raise one's head, we'll touch the wall of rules. For example, that Mr. of mine put forth the purpose of learning. He wants to get rid of those corrupt Confucians and cynics. It's a bit like cleaning up the door. Those who do will make enemies on all sides, and it's inevitable that they'll be ostracized. Wu Yuan shook her head. Mr.'s idea is good, but there's always the fear of going to extremes. Moreover, everyone has a lazy nature. It's very possible that after 100 years of prosperity, there will be 500 years, or even 1,000 years of decline. This is because although the scholars are still diligently studying the sage's books, each one of them putting on a sanctimonious appearance, in the end, they're no longer doing it for the sake of cultivating the noble spirit as the sage said. It's still all right now. The Confucian school's 3 immortals, the sage and the gentleman, are still pursuing the word virtue. But once Mr.'s knowledge gradually becomes the moral standard of the world, won't it be forcefully pulled down to the level of performing meritorious service? For a long time, it's actually the scholars who look down on cultivating virtue through studying the most. Just by reading a few words, flipping a few pages of a book. It's as if they can be exchanged for a lot of copper coins. How frightening would that be? Fu Yu was stunned at first, but soon her expression changed drastically. She stretched out her hand and grabbed Wu Yuan's arm with all her strength. She said in a low voice, "Wu Yuan, you must never say these words to your mister. Absolutely not. You're not a qi refinement warrior, and you're not a cultivator. You don't know the cruelty of the struggle for the great Tao. A careless word, a careless action, can bring about a fatal disaster." Wu Yuan patted the back of Fu Yu's hand. She laughed hoarsely and said, "Of course I don't have the guts. Besides, with that mister of mine's knowledge and wisdom, it's very likely that I've been thinking wrongly and too shallow. Mister definitely won't take a liking to my little idea." Fu Yu released her hand. "You must not let it slip. I don't want to see you end up like Song Yuzhang one day." Inexplicably, Fu Yu did not continue speaking. "The more you speak, the more likely you'll slip up." Wu Yuan changed the topic. "If I take the wrong path in the future, no matter how high an official I become at that time, Fu Yu, you must remember to scold me to my face. It's best if you can wake me up with a scolding. Don't worry. When the time comes, I'll definitely give Wu Shongshu a punch without a second word. The minister of the 6 ministries? Just a rank 2. That's a little small, a little small. It's not small. Think about it. When I, Dali, take over half of the Aquarius continent, how can a minister of the 6 ministries be small? I think the position of assistant minister is already very big. Anyway, Lord Wu, I'll say this. I'm a person who only knows how to come up with some small ideas. I know how to scheme, but I'm not good at making decisions. So, I'll consider myself as following you to death. When you become a minister in the future, you can give me the position of assistant minister. How about that?" The 2 scholars who were already in the officialdom laughed as they walked back to the Yaman's official residence. In the Li family's residence, a scholar dressed in green picked up his book again. He smiled and said, "Regarding the matter of merit, Wu Yuan, you're not wrong. But you've indeed thought too lightly." The small town was bustling with activity. Other than going to the abandoned school to study every day, the young Qishi still lived in the Yuan family's old mansion. Every day, he would move a chair and sit beside the courtyard where the wind and water gathered. He would often be in a daze for 2 to 4 hours at a time. Occasionally, he would go to the new school opened by the Chen family in Dragon Tail Creek to take a stroll. He would skim the surface of the water and quickly leave. The county magistrate of Longquan County, Wu Yuan, had already officially stepped down from her position as the supervisor of kilns. It was said that the person who replaced her was a young talent from the Cao family of Upper Pillar State. The Cao family and Wu Yuan's future father-in-law, the Yuan family, were famous rivals in Dallas Imperial Court. They could fight on all kinds of occasions without saying a word. In the small imperial court where Huangzi met, the 2 powerful pillars of Upper Pillar State pointed at each other's noses and scolded each other. It was a common occurrence. His Majesty mostly advised them with kind words. Sometimes, when he was really annoyed, he told the 2 of them to go home and argue. After all, the 2 families had been neighbors since their ancestors. It was said that the children of the 2 families had learned to throw all kinds of objects at their neighbors through a wall. You throw bricks, I throw mud. Wu Yuan visited this time to humbly ask her teacher for advice. "Teacher, the Cao family has always controlled the land in the Ministry of Personnel of the Imperial Court. Are you preparing to move me back to a government office in the capital and sit on the cold bench for a few years before I can open up the situation?" "That's not it." Kui Dong was still sitting calmly on the big chair. He said indifferently, "How's Cao Ji's family background? How's his ability?" Wu Yuan smiled bitterly. "His family background is far better than mine. His ability is also quite good. Fighting with such a person just shows that you, Wu Yuan, still have some ability, don't you? Besides, you are the county magistrate of Longquan County. Cao Ji is only the supervisor of kilns. Now that the Dragon Kill has been reopened, it's just doing some finishing work related to the natal porcelain. It's not as serious as you think." The young imperial tutor with a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows looked at the courtyard. Of course Cow wants Cow G to step on you to climb up. Now it depends on whether you have the ability to become Cow G's obstacle in the officialdom. If you can't stop him, it's hard to say whether Lady Yuan is still willing to marry her daughter. If you can stop Cow G, who Lady Cow has placed high hopes on, Lady Yuan might beg you to marry that daughter. Kui Dong glanced at Wu Yuan. When His Majesty uses people, it's inevitable that there will be differences between those who are close and those who are distant. After the meritorious service, he has always given preferential treatment. But in the end, it still depends on your own ability. Wu Yuan smiled and said, after listening to teacher's explanation, this student's mood is much better. Kui Dong sneered and said, kid, your mood is much better. But what about me? Wu Yuan pretended to be deaf and mute. She was determined not to speak. Kui Dong suddenly said out of the blue, do you have any thoughts about the conflict between Master Wan's only daughter, Wan Xiu, and an outsider? Wu Yuan thought for a moment and quickly said, although Wan Xiu's attack was a bit heavy, it was still that self-proclaimed romantic idiot who started it. She has reminded him several times. It's not reasonable, but it's reasonable. There's nothing wrong with it. What's more, her father, Wan Fei, fought fiercely and killed Li Zhu in the sky above the cave. After that, no cultivator dared to violate the rules. Like father, like daughter. Kui Dong was a little impatient. He probably thought that this student was too stupid, so he poured out a bunch of beans from a bamboo tube. My Lord Wu, I'll have to trouble you to investigate carefully. Why would that idiot have the leisure to wander around and happen to pass by Wan Xiu's small shop in the Riding Dragon Alley? Moreover, he didn't know her identity at all. Moreover, he did it at the moment when his family was buying the mountain and making friends with Dali. If one or two coincidences are coincidences, then don't you find it strange that there are so many coincidences? There are many stupid and lustful men in the world, but how could a young man who is qualified to represent his family to show his face here, and whose cultivation aptitude is quite good, be so unlucky? The young man said humorously, but Wu Yuan's expression was solemn. She was not relaxed at all. In the end, the young man began to complain again. He rubbed his cheeks hard with both hands. Speaking of which, I'm even more miserable than that lustful man, but I'm really unlucky. Wu Yuan, why don't you extend your face over and let me slap you a few times to vent my anger? Wu Yuan was not stupid. It was obvious that she would be slapped for nothing. Sir, I think we should just forget about it. The young man said angrily, a teacher for a day is a father for life. You're just like me. You're most likely the kind of person who deceives his master and destroys his ancestors. When the affairs of Longquan County are more or less settled, try to find time to go to the capital and continue to discuss the matter of building an academy in Mount Covering Cloud with me, me. Wu Yuan nodded. Her expression did not change at all. The young man waved his hand to chase her away. Go about your business. Wu Yuan stood up and bid farewell. In this Yuan family's old mansion, other than the quiet young man with a delicate face, Wu Yuan had brought back a young felon named Xie Yulu for her master, Kui Dong, after a secret trip. He was 14 years old. His body was slender, and he did not lose out to a strong young man. His face was like a jade crown, and his skin was like a jade tree. He had a first-class appearance. For some reason, Kui Dong had asked him to change his name to Yu Lu. Even though the young man was very unwilling, he could only accept it silently. The tall young man who changed his name to Yu Lu had probably escaped from the abyss of suffering, or perhaps he was born with a cheerful personality. He cleaned this Yuan family's old mansion from the first floor to the second floor. In the end, he even climbed up to the roof to renovate the old tiles. If Kui Dong did not find the young man noisy and scolded him, the young man would probably even paint the walls of the old mansion. The bowls, dishes, and vases in the house were all wiped clean by Yu Lu. Every time Wu Yuan visited her master, she could see Yu Lu busying himself over there. When he saw her, other than smiling, he would stand in the distance, holding a broom, and patiently wait for her to leave. After politely sending off the guests, the young man would begin to clean the footprints, wipe the chairs, and other servant chores. The young man's enjoyment in it puzzled Wu Yuan. Could it be that the young man's mind was a little muddled due to the destruction of his country and his entire family being reduced to felons? After Yu Lu had adapted to the quiet and busy life in the old mansion, Kui Dong, who had a secret letter in his sleeve, quietly brought a stranger back to the mansion. It was a slim young girl with a dark face. Her appearance could only be considered below average. Her expression was stiff all day long, but her eyes were still delicate. Even when facing the Dali imperial tutor, she was expressionless. She was fearless and did not try to please him. This made Yu Lu admire her. When he heard that she was also a felon who had immigrated, he wanted to be more attentive to her. Unfortunately, the young girl ignored him completely. She was clumsy when it came to household chores. She made a lot of mistakes and broke the bowls and plates more than once or twice. In the end, Yu Lu could not stand it anymore and asked her to sit down and rest. He took care of all the chores, big and small, by himself. Buying vegetables, washing rice, cooking, and washing clothes. She did not stand on ceremony and just sat on the chair every day. She was more like a master than her master, Kui Dong. The young girl did not seem to appreciate Yu Lu's good intentions. She did not even look at the young man. Instead, she would occasionally catch a glimpse from the corner of her eyes. In the eyes of that mediocre face, there would be a hint of sarcasm. Kui Dong clapped his hands heavily. "All three of you, come here." The tall and handsome young man, Yu Lu, the young girl with an excellent figure, and the young man with a flawless appearance stood in front of Kui Dong. Kui Dong tilted his head and looked at the three of them. Finally, his eyes stopped on the tall young man. "Yu Lu, you were a chess piece that I fought for from the beginning. As for you, you were something that the Empress was determined to get. But now that she has lost her power, she's a little desolate. She's been banished to the Changchun Palace to cultivate her heart and mind. As for the other me in the capital of Great Li, after I took control of the Green Bamboo Pavilion, I took advantage of the situation and brought you to me. It can be said that I brought you out of the fire pit. You should thank me. According to the Empress' usual style of doing things, you might not end up better than that young Hua in the future if you fall into her hands." Kui Dong shifted his gaze and looked at the young girl. "What's your name in the future? Or do you want to learn from Yu Lu and change everything?" The young girl said with a gentle voice, "Imperial Tutor Daren, it's fine as long as my surname is Xie." Kui Dong thought for a moment and laughed. "Oh, then why don't you call yourself Xie and name Xie? This name is so convenient." "Thank you, why don't you thank me?" The young girl was still expressionless, but her eyes were burning with anger. No matter how the young girl tried to hide it, she couldn't hide it. Kui Dong said sadly, "I won't be called Kui Dong in the future. If you like, you can call me Kui Dong Shan, or Young Master." Kui Dong's face was disheartened. "Yu Lu, thank you. Pack up your things. We'll leave tomorrow and follow the south road to the border Yefu Pass." The two of them didn't question him. Kui Dong looked at the young boy who was full of expectation. "You, just stay here. You can go to the Chen school to study. It's up to you." The young boy was full of grievances. Just when he was about to pluck up his courage and ask to go with him, Kui Dong already glared at him. "Get lost." The young boy was shocked and quickly left. Kui Dong stood up and walked to a small study on the second floor. He began to write a letter. It was full of nearly 10,000 words. Too much is as bad as too little. Dali Imperial Court praises literati too much, so many people fishing for fame use poetry as a shortcut to enter the officialdom. We must change the current atmosphere in the capital of Great Li. We must not let the Imperial Court be filled with officials, peddlers, and servants, who blindly worship the superficial style of learning of beautiful prose. We must attach importance to the classics, to the current affairs, and to the actual situation. We must firmly grasp the word merit. Even if the Song clan of Great Li were to change dynasties, no matter who is going to sit on the dragon throne, we must not lose the foundation of our achievement in the Great Tao. It's just that it's the right thing to do. The Imperial College must be in our hands. When appropriate, we can withdraw Qintianjian's arrangement in exchange for complete control of the Imperial College. At the end of the letter, Kui Dong suddenly threw his pen on the ground. What's the use of writing this now? I'm not me anymore. You're just a guy who doesn't know how to feel. You still have the face to ask me to not contact you for the time being and take care of yourself. You should give me half of your family's property. You're indeed old Kui Dong, a stingy chicken. You're enjoying life in the capital, but I'm going to be someone's student. God, why don't you just strike me with lightning and kill me? The young boy with a cinnabar mole between his eyebrows burst into tears. He was heartbroken. 132. At dawn, a carriage stopped outside the Yuan family's old house. The tall young man, Yu Lu, and the tanned girl, Xie Xie, were waiting beside the carriage with their bags on their backs. The young man, Kui Dong, walked out of the house with a yawn. He was wearing an ivory white robe with exquisite craftsmanship. Behind him was a young man with a face as delicate as porcelain. Yu Lu couldn't help but ask, "Young master, where are we going?" Kui Dong said in languid, "I'm going to take you to study, to the Great Sui Kingdom. You two are originally students of Cliff Academy." Yu Lu and Xie Xie, the two prisoners of the Lu dynasty, looked at each other. The coachman was a great spy from the Li dynasty stationed in Longquan County town. He sat motionlessly on the driver's seat. After Kui Shi got on the carriage and bent down to lift the curtain, he suddenly turned his head and said, "Go and call Wang Yifu over to be the coachman. You will continue to stay in the county town and be responsible for keeping an eye on the movements in Dragon Rider Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley." The spy nodded and left without saying a word. About 10 minutes later, a tall man strode over. The tall young man looked straight ahead with a calm expression. The girl's eyes were cold. She didn't seem to like the man named Wang Yifu. Wang Yifu was the man who was ordered to twist off Song Yuzhang's head. He was a fierce general of the Lu dynasty in the past. He didn't become a prisoner of Dali, didn't become a guest of the new dynasty, and didn't regain military power. Instead, he became the lackey of the empress. As she was banished to the Eternal Spring Palace to cultivate, Wang Yifu's master changed from the Empress of Dali to the young imperial tutor in front of him. The carriage was large enough to accommodate 3 people because of the post road. However, Kui Dong still let the young man and girl sit outside. He occupied the spacious carriage alone. Not long after, the sound of reading came from the carriage. The imperial tutor of Dali, the famous Go player of the continent, had to recite such elementary knowledge every day. It was really funny. The carriage drove out of the town from the east gate. Kui Dong lifted the curtain and looked at the newly built county government near the east gate. It wasn't completed yet, just a prototype. Under the supervision of the government official, the young people in the town were already busy, causing dust to fly around the east gate. Kui Dong put down the curtain with a gloomy look. After leaving the town, they drove along the post road for about 2 hours. Kui Dong asked Wang Yifu to stop the carriage and walked alone to a small hill. The gentleman of Lakeview Academy, Kui Minghuang, had been waiting for a long time. When he saw his ancestor who had been expelled from the family, he bowed respectfully. Kui Dong stood on the top of the hill and looked back at the town. Unfortunately, his state had dropped greatly and his cultivation was low. Even if he used all his eyesight, he couldn't see the scenery over there. The matter of worshipping Mount Biyun as the north peak of Dali still needs some time to prepare. It won't be successful in a short time. However, building a new academy at Mount Biyun is imperative. There will be results in half a year at most. Don't worry. You took such a big risk this time and almost lost your life. I won't burn the bridge after crossing the river. A deputy hill master of the academy can't run away. In the future, Dali will definitely use all the national resources to build this new academy. It will be more like one of the 72 academies of Confucianism than Cliff Academy. Kui Minghuang breathed a sigh of relief. His eyes were firm as he promised, "I won't let you down." Kui Dong didn't say a word and continued, "I'll leave the porcelain youth to you. When the time comes, you can place him in the new academy. If nothing unexpected happens, his cultivation will be very smooth. He might even reach the middle 5 realms at a frightening speed. You have to be mentally prepared. However, you'd better hide him. Don't come out too early. I picked out tens of thousands of pieces of broken porcelain from the porcelain mountain and spent a lot of effort to piece together a porcelain man with a soul. This young man was able to grow from a pile of broken porcelain pieces to a lifelike being no different from a human being. Not only is it the condensation of my life's efforts, but it also has a lot to do with luck. Therefore, you must pay more attention. To say something inauspicious, this is equivalent to me entrusting my child to you. Kui Minghuang's emotions surged. He bowed and cupped his fists. Rest assured, ancestor. I, Kui Minghuang, will definitely treat him as my own child. Kui Dong looked a little tired. In this town, other than the vassal King Song Jianqiang, you can order the other two groups of spies and death warriors as you wish. I've already helped you talk to them. Also, when you're free, talk to old Yang of the Yang family's shop. That old bastard is the most fair person. He doesn't talk about good or bad, good or evil, friend or foe. Try to make that old man agree to do business with you. As for Wan Tong, I advise you not to ask for trouble. The 4 great surnames and 10 great clans of Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley are now in disarray. Their hearts are scattered. You should pay more attention to the Li family. Yes, it's the Li family that Li Shisheng belongs to. As for that second young master Li Baozhen whose heart is higher than the sky, now that his backer has fallen, although it can't be said that he has been beaten back to his original state overnight, it can be said that he has experienced the treachery of our great Li's capital. Between these 2 brothers, you can choose either, but you can only choose one. As for Wu Yuan, you can do as you see fit. Just deal with the matter as it is and don't reveal your heart. When Kui Shi reached the end of his speech, he clearly had the handsome appearance of a young man, but he gave Kui Minghuang the illusion that he was an old man, that everything was over. Kui Minghuang asked tentatively, that student Wu Yuan, could it be? Kui Dong walked down the mountain with his shoulders drooping. He nodded and said weakly, he's the Empress man. She likes to choose people like this. They don't come from good backgrounds, but they're smart, ambitious, and patient. It's just that they all have their own fatal flaws and are easy for her to control. Kui Minghuang was enlightened. No wonder. Ancestor, I always felt that something was wrong when you revealed the heavenly secret at the Yuan family's ancestral home. It was only later that I realized it was because Wu Yuan was there. Kui Dong sighed. He didn't hide the truth and said frankly, at the Yuan family's ancestral home, I gave him a chance. He leaked all the information about the trifling matter before, so I didn't bother to pursue it. But if he chose to reveal that matter to the Empress after leaving the house, then he'd be dead. A disciple deceives his master and destroys his ancestors, so it's only right for a teacher to kill a student. Kui Minghuang was speechless. Kui Dong patted this junior's shoulder. I have high hopes for you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling you all this. Kui Minghuang smiled bitterly. I'm afraid. All right, you don't have to send me off. Kui Dong quickened his pace and walked down the mountain. After a dozen steps, he turned around and said with a smile, you and I are both smart people. You must be thinking that since I set a trap for Wu Yuan, I won't let you go. In fact, you're right. But where the trap is and when you need to make a life and death decision, you have to figure it out yourself. Kui Minghuang didn't panic, nor did he feel wronged. Instead, he was full of fighting spirit. I've read all the books I need to read. The fun of life from now on will be here. Kui Dong turned around and looked at the carriage at the foot of the mountain. He clicked his tongue and said with his hands in his sleeves, sure enough, we have all 3 kinds of disciples. You, Kui Minghuang, Wu Yuan, and the porcelain man are all here. From now on, it's up to the 4 of us. As he walked, Kui Dong shuddered and murmured, if he finds out the truth one day, with that kid's temper in Mud Bottle Alley, he'll definitely kill me. Maybe he won't even blink. The young man with the cinnabar mole between his eyebrows looked anxious and sad. The point is, it's only right for a master to kill a disciple. No, I, Kui Dong, can't be so miserable. I have to think of a way. The young man suddenly squinted his eyes and laughed. He swaggered as he walked and said, you can pour all the dirty water on Dali Imperial Tutor. I'm Kui Dong Shan, not Kui Dong. The body he was living in now could be regarded as an extremely precious treasure. It was born with no impurities, but it was born with dementia. Before the age of 6, his soul had completely dissipated. Kui Dong had refined it with a secret method for many years into an inn that was easy for souls to stay in. Back then, because the fairy cave was too important and involved his great way opportunity, he had to be there in person. Therefore, he moved out of this body and divided his soul into it. In this way, there were 2 Kui Dong in the world, one old and one young. The old Kui Dong stayed in Dallas capital city as his imperial tutor, devising strategies thousands of miles away. The young Kui Dong came to the small town and hid in the Yuan family's old house to prevent accidents. Of course, deep in his heart, Kui Dong had the intention of watching Qi Jingchun finish his last journey. He wanted to defeat Qi Jingchun fair and square for once. Unfortunately, Kui Dong did not expect that he would first lose to Qi Jingchun. Not only did he suffer a crushing defeat, but it was even worse after that. The old man who had clearly died in the meritorious forest of the Learning Palace came to him and casually cut off his connection with his original body, Kui Dong. He also punished him to read a few lousy books every day. The funny thing was that there was not a single book written by the old man. In the end, the old man even made a ridiculous decision to make Kui Dong a student of the young man surnamed Chen. What could Kui Dong learn from Chen Pinggan? Should he learn how to burn porcelain or how to burn charcoal? As for what the old man was thinking, God knows. It was the literal meaning of God knows. The old man's highest rank in the secular world was only that of a scholar. But when he was in the Confucian temple of Confucius, he was ranked 4th. At that time, the old man was like the sun in the sky. Otherwise, how could someone move the statue and erect it when the old man was not dead? The old man himself could not stop it. However, Kui Dong always felt that the old man was actually secretly happy at that time and did not really want to stop it. In short, this case was destined to disappear from the official history and unofficial history. As time passed, the remaining traces would also disappear little by little. On the road to the southern pass of Dali, Yefu Pass, a carriage stopped at the roadside outside the relay station. A young man in white with a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows stood on the roof of the carriage, facing the north and looking forward. Wang Yifu sat in the driver's seat, silent as usual. The tall young man, Yu Lu, was checking the items in his bag. The young girl with a graceful figure but a coarse face was the most relaxed. She sat beside Wang Yifu, back to back with the young man. She was swinging her legs and eating melon seeds one by one. The young man, Kui Dong, stomped his foot. "You're finally here." Wang Yifu did not turn around and said softly, "Your Highness, take care in the future." The tall young man, who had changed his name to Yu Lu, nodded and smiled. "General Wang is the same." Wang Yifu nodded and was about to speak. The young girl who had finished eating melon seeds clapped her hands and said lightly, "General Wang, there's no need to be polite with a lowly criminal like me." Wang Yifu smiled bitterly. "It's us who have let down your sect." The young girl folded her hands on her knees and looked up at the blue sky. She smiled. "Then you can talk to those dead people whose souls have scattered. I did not participate in that war, nor did I commit suicide afterwards. On the contrary, I'm living quite well and will soon be a student of the New Cliff Academy. So, it's quite boring for General Wang to say this to me." Yu Lu suddenly said, "Wang Yifu, ignore her. She's just a child who hasn't grown up. She's angry but doesn't know who to vent it on. At this time, she'll stab whoever is easy to talk to." The young girl smiled. "Oh, you still think you're the noble crown prince of the Lu family? You think you have the right to teach me how to be a person?" Yu Lu smiled and did not speak. He lowered his head and continued to pack. Wang Yifu felt a headache coming on. If not for the safety of these 2 children, Wang Yifu would not have agreed to serve Empress Dali. Chen Ping'an's group went south along the edge of the posthouse road. Then, they saw a familiar white-clothed young man running towards them. That kind of enthusiasm was even more exaggerated than a young girl in love. The white-clothed young man with a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows smiled brightly. "Chen Ping'an, although it sounds like a joke, I'm actually telling you very seriously that from today onwards, I'm your student. If you don't recognize me as your student, I'll die in front of you. After I die, remember to help me erect a tombstone and write grave of Chen Ping'an's disciple. Chen Ping'an was stunned for a long time before he recovered. He asked, "What's your real name?" The young man laughed heartily. "Kui Dongshan." Chen Ping'an nodded. "Then I'll help you add 3 words on the tombstone." "133. The teenager was not surprised and began to guide him patiently. "I know you don't trust me and think I'm a person with ulterior motives. But you can observe me for a while and then decide whether to accept me as your first disciple. I, Kui Dongshan, don't have a high cultivation now, but I'm knowledgeable. I know the local conditions and customs of the Great Sui Kingdom like the back of my hand. When you go to the Great Sui Kingdom, with or without me, it will be a world of difference." Seeing that the teenager in Mud Bottle Alley was still indifferent, Kui Dong was not discouraged and kept talking. "Besides, I didn't come empty-handed this time. I brought a very generous gift for apprenticeship. For example, the cultivator of the Middle 5 realms who traveled the world almost had a volume of map of swamp spirits and monsters in each hand. Mine is even more precious and naturally bred 5 or 6 kinds of spirits and monsters." The teenager counted with his fingers and said one by one, "There is also a set of 4 treasures of the study. The pen is a purple pen with a hidden ink fish. Whether it's writing or painting, it doesn't need to be cleaned after it's used. The little fish will help to clean it by itself. How about it? Isn't it amazing? It can be counted as a first-class scholar, right? The ink is made from 3 ingots of Songtao ink. If you tap it lightly with your finger, it will produce a pleasant sound. Even if it's a withered brush that's only dipped in a little ink, the smell of the ink can still linger for several years. The inkstone is an ancient inkstone left by an unknown old monk in another continent. It's called the life-releasing pond. It has a lot of mysteries. Aren't you tempted? The paper is the golden stone paper. The emperor of a country wants to use this paper to confer the title of the god of mountains and rivers. Only then can it be authentic." When the youth said that, he took a deep breath. "The most important treasure is a half-dead intrinsic flying sword. Its quality is excellent and its sharpness is unparalleled. The biggest advantage is that it doesn't need a successor to cultivate sword chi or develop sword intent. It can be used almost immediately. When I got it by chance, I kept it for many years and didn't refine it. It's not that I don't value it, but that I don't want to walk the path of sword cultivation. I'm afraid of wasting it." Towards the end of his speech, Quisha's voice, which was originally in high spirits, became softer and softer. This was because he realized that as his gift for becoming Chen Ping'an's disciple became more and more generous, Chen Ping'an's gaze of rejection became more and more resolute. The handsome teenager with a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows was full of resentment. He held his hands in front of his chest and asked pitifully and tentatively, "Can't I? I sincerely want to be your disciple. If you don't believe me, I can swear that if I have any bad intentions towards you, Chen Ping'an, I will be struck by lightning." Chen Ping'an shook his head and said firmly, "No." The first time Chen Ping'an saw this teenager in the town was in Master Wan's blacksmith shop. He mistook him for the county magistrate's study companion. The second time, the teenager who called himself Marshal Uncle Kui Dong took the initiative to talk to Chen Ping'an. At the memorial arch, he told Chen Ping'an a lot of strange inside stories. After that, he followed Chen Ping'an all the way to the Mud Bottle Alley and stole the Spring Festival couplets that Song Jisin stuck on the door. Chen Ping'an didn't sense the killing intent from the teenager like the Yunxia Mountain Fairy Cai Qinqian. However, Chen Ping'an absolutely didn't trust him and hoped to stay away from him. He didn't expect that the teenager would still shamelessly chase after him when he was almost at the border of Dali. Chen Ping'an was not stupid. What else could a weasel want from a chicken? Kui Dong silently glanced at the teenager's hair bun. The jasper hairpin had disappeared. According to the previous agreement, the old man would help him to pave the way. At the very least, He wouldn't expose his identity as the Dali imperial tutor, let alone reveal his scheme against Chen Pinggan and Qi Jingchun. Kui Dong was too lazy to calculate and deduce why the old man was so generous to let him go, and even why he wanted to walk out of the merit and virtue forest when the overall situation was already decided. He was really overestimating himself to compete with a real sage. In particular, now that his soul had been separated, Quisha's cultivation and mental strength were not as good as before. He was scared that he might accidentally violate the fundamental rules that the old man had set up if he went too deep into the deduction. If so, he would end up like the original owner of this body and become a complete idiot. Kui Dong asked, Chen Pinggan, didn't you meet a poor old scholar in the Pillow Inn of Red Candle Town? Didn't he tell you the general reason? Chen Pinggan frowned. Kui Dong carefully looked at Chen Pinggan and felt that the teenager's expression didn't seem to be fake. Well, then I have to use my trump card. But let me say this first, Chen Pinggan, I am so sincere in acknowledging you as my master, but you are so evasive. Then, my gift will be reduced by half. I'll give you one last chance. Chen Pinggan was about to turn around without saying a word. Kui Dong quickly took out a black chess piece from his sleeve and threw it high into the air. This is the information given to you by Old Yang. After you crush it, you will know the details of this matter. Then you will help me prove my innocence and tell Chen Pinggan that I didn't come to acknowledge him as my master because of greed, but because I sincerely want to establish a master-disciple relationship with him. The yin spirit did not show his real body. The black chess piece, which could leave behind a voice, shattered in the air and turned into powder in an instant. Soon, Lin Shuyi came to Chen Pinggan with a strange expression and whispered, Senior Yin Spirit said that old Yang of the Yang family shop asked you to believe that this guy named Kui Dongshan won't secretly play tricks. On the way to the academy of the Great Sui Kingdom, you can generously let him work like a cow or a horse and order him around at will. It would be a waste if you don't accept such a disciple. He also said that this person will share honor and disgrace with you in the future, and that he won't dare to have any bad intentions towards you. Chen Pinggan nodded and asked, They are? Kui Shi's face lit up with a smile. Them. The big blockhead is called Yu Lu. The little black girl is called Xie Xie. Her surname is Xie and her given name is Xie. I wonder who gave her this name. Then Kui Dong showed a sad expression that even a blind person would not believe. He sighed and said, Both of them are survivors of the prisoners of the Lu dynasty. Their backgrounds are very pitiful. Xie Xie had studied at the Cliff Academy for a period of time. Yu Lu was unlucky. Not long after he left his hometown, our Dali launched that war, and the two of them had to return to their hometowns. Now that their country has been destroyed, their identity as students of the academy has become their life-saving talisman. If I don't bring them out, they will definitely die in the mountains west of your Longquan County. They will either be beaten to death by some immortal on the mountain who dislikes them, or they will be exhausted early and die of exhaustion before the age of 30. So now they are very grateful and insist on calling me young master. No matter how I persuade them, I can't persuade them. Alas. Unexpectedly, the tanned girl smiled and said, Since the way we address you has become a burden to you, I won't call you young master anymore. Fortunately, Yu Lu did not add fuel to the fire. He smiled and said, I'll continue to call you young master. I'm used to it. Kui Dong turned around and laughed, Thank you, miss. I thank you. Lin Shuyi paused, as if he had been secretly taught a trick by the yin god. He said softly, Old Yang said that we'd better accept these two people. There are only benefits and no harm. If you really don't like the one with the surname Kui, you can use him as a scapegoat in the future. If there are any disasters or difficulties, let him take all of them. He has a Fengsuan item on him. He has a strong family background and can withstand any damage. Kui Dong, who had been eavesdropping, suddenly changed his expression. He stomped his feet and scolded, Old Yang, you old bastard, how can you cheat people like you? Chen Pinggan lowered his voice and asked with a smile, If we accept these two people, will they be your classmates in the future? Lin Shuyi smiled bitterly and said, Maybe. Actually, Li Baoping and I don't know the real situation of Cliff Academy. When old Master Ma took us out of town, he didn't say anything about this. Li Huai kept peeking at the tall young man named Yu Lu. He felt that he was an easy guy to deal with. He was definitely easier to talk to than the bad-tempered Li Baoping and the cold Lin Shuyi. Yu Lu, who was carrying a heavy bag, noticed Li Huai's gaze. The Lu dynasty's crown prince smiled and nodded to salute him. The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket, who was carrying a small green bookcase, looked at the tall, tanned girl from time to time. It was the exact opposite of when they met the blind old Taoist and his disciples. Li Baoping liked the round-faced little girl whose nickname was Ju. She didn't like this girl with a strange name at all. Although Ju had a smile on her face, her true emotions couldn't be seen. However, she didn't like Li Baoping, who was half a head shorter than her. This kind of strange feeling between a little girl and a young girl who met for the first time shouldn't have anything to do with reason. Chen Pinggan looked at Kui Dong and said, "Yu Lu and Ju can join us, but you can't." Kui Dong restrained his expression and asked stiffly, "Why?" Chen Pinggan replied, "Because I don't think you're a good person." On the courier road, no one thought this sentence was funny or funny. Even the most simple-minded Li Huai felt the pressure of an impending storm. Yu Lu turned his head and looked back. Dust was flying in the distance. The hooves of the horses neatly stepped on the ground, and the ground trembled. The ground was like the body of a lowly person who had been whipped. It was dying and could only bear it silently. The vigorous military might of the Dali Iron Cavalry rushed over. Even if it was only a group of 30 to 40 light cavalry, it still exuded a rough and intimidating murderous aura. This made the tall youth squint his eyes involuntarily. On the other side, Kui Dong stretched out his palms and made a dantian gesture. He tried to be calm and said, "The reason I'm here is because an old scholar wants me to learn how to be a good person from you. It's okay if you don't accept me as a student. I'll follow you as Yu Lu and Ju's son. Just treat me as if I don't exist. How about it?" Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "As long as you don't provoke me and don't say weird things like teacher and student, it's okay." Kui Dong was just about to say something. The Dali cavalry flashed past with a roar. Yu Lu, who had been observing all the details of this cavalry, had already lowered his head. He did not forget to use his arm to block the wind and dust. The young girl had already moved to the outside of the courier road. The youth with a cinnabar mole between his eyebrows, Kui Dong, happened to be wearing a spotless white robe. The majestic Dali cavalry roared past. Kui Dong silently stood where he was. The talkative youth was covered in dust. His mouth was still open, but he could not say a single word. Li Huai only felt that this scene was too horrible to look at. He said in a small voice, "It's a little tragic." The white-clothed youth covered in dust raised his hand to wipe his face. His eyes were dazed as he muttered, "I can't live like this." According to the rules set by Ruanju, now idle cultivators crossing the border, without the amnesty of the Dali Imperial Court, as long as they passed by the sky above the original Liju cave, they could not cross the sky or fly on their swords. After the famous Qi cultivators paid with their lives, now many forces in Dali tacitly agreed to this unreasonable rule. The cultivator of the Wind and Thunder Garden, Liu Baqiao, landed his flying sword outside the boundary. After paying, he took a luxurious carriage specially provided for cultivators by the courier station and rushed to the county. He found the new school opened by the Chen family in Longwei County and found his good friend Chen Songfeng was personally teaching a dozen children. When Chen Songfeng found Liu Baqiao standing outside the window, he wanted to find someone to help him teach the children. Liu Baqiao quickly waved his hand, indicating that he just needed to wait. An hour later, after the children bowed to him, Mr. Chen Songfeng quickly walked out of the classroom and walked side by side with Liu Baqiao. He looked at the sword and asked curiously, "This is one of the best Taoist talisman swords, the talisman in the dragon-locking well in Dali's capital city?" Liu Baqiao rolled his eyes and held the back of his head with both hands. Song Jianqiang, that bastard, said that he would leave the talisman sword for me and wait for me to pull it out. As a result, all I heard on my way to the north was that someone in Dali's capital city had taken the talisman sword. I didn't believe it and thought that Song Jianqiang had used a trick from the military book to deliberately pave the way for me. As a result, when I arrived in the capital city, well, a powerful woman named Yang Hua had really beaten me to it. The more Liu Baqiao spoke, the angrier he became. I went to Song Jianqiang to ask for an explanation. Do you know what happened? Song Jianqiang just asked someone to pass a message to me, saying that if I had the ability, I should go find Yang Hua myself and take the talisman back. I have never seen a shameless Grandmaster Xi Jing in my life. Later, I heard from the grapevine that now this woman is in your Tiefu River and has become a river god enjoying incense offerings. This is fate. Chen Songfeng was stunned. You came to Longquan County this time to take back the talisman from the hands of that water god? Liu Baqiao shook his head and said, Am I, Liu Baqiao, that kind of person? Chen Songfeng was even more puzzled. If it's not to see that female water god, then why did you come to Longquan County? Liu Baqiao sighed and said, It's just that on the way back to the Wind Thunder Garden, I took a slight detour and came here. I heard a lot of things about Longquan County before, including that your Longwei County's Chen family has opened a school here, so I wanted to come and see you. I really didn't go for Yang Hua and the talisman. Chen Songfeng smiled and said, Now that I'm here to teach and dispel doubts, at first I wasn't used to it. I couldn't wait to slap the table and leave, but now it's better. I often tell myself to treat it as training my mind. Liu Baqiao nodded. It's really good to calm down and do learning. By the way, the change that started in Red Candle Town and ended in Dallas capital city? Have you heard about it? Chen Songfeng nodded and said, Of course I've received all kinds of rumors, but there are different opinions within the family. The inside information from different channels contradicts each other, and in the end, I can't say anything about it. Liu Baqiao laughed and said, Have you forgotten that I was in Dallas capital city at that time? Do you want to know the truth? Chen Songfeng shook his head and said, No. I'm not a cultivator. I'm not a cultivator, so I'm not interested in your long-sighted and long-lived matters. Chen Songfeng had also traveled to study before, and it wasn't the first time he followed the wanderers to climb mountains to write essays. He wasn't a weak scholar, but when he followed the girl from Ying's Chen family into the mountains, in the end, his leg strength and stamina couldn't even compare to a youth in a shabby alley, so he was kicked out of the team by Chen Xiong. Of course, Liu Baqiao wasn't happy that no one came to support him. He exposed him and said, Young and lethargic, you deserve to be looked down upon by that little girl Chen Xiong. Chen Songfeng laughed out loud, Hey, don't hit my face when you hit me, what kind of hero are you to expose my scars? Liu Baqiao's face became mysterious, he lowered his voice and said, Then do you want to know about the shocking news regarding the inverted suspended mountain? Chen Songfeng replied without hesitation, Speak. Liu Baqiao teased him, Hey, you just said that you're not a cultivator, and you're curious about that. Chen Songfeng looked exhausted, he spoke slowly and carefully. Any news that comes out from the inverted suspended mountain will only be related to that world. And the commotion from that place will most likely decide the entire world. Even if our Aquarius continent will only be affected by the smallest ripple, the earlier we know about it, the earlier we can make the correct response. Even if we only gain a little, it's better than not doing anything. Liu Baqiao was helpless about it, everyone had their own positions, and sometimes, no matter how nice the consolation of others was, it would still be easy for them to say it. Liu Baqiao was not willing to be friends with such words. In the eyes of the sword cultivator from Wind and Thunder Garden, a true friend was someone who would not be able to see Liu Baqiao's shadow when you soared, but when you were in trouble and needed someone to stand up for you, even without you saying anything, I, Liu Baqiao, would already be standing by your side. After that, the trouble would be solved, and you don't have to thank me. If I, Liu Baqiao, were to die in this trouble, you don't have to feel guilty. Liu Baqiao pointed to the northeast direction. Actually, I don't know much, I only know that the continent in the northeast is the last territory of the sword cultivators, and almost half of the sword cultivators, under the call of the two great sword immortals, rushed to the inverted suspended mountain. I don't know why, but when these sword cultivators passed by the sky above Pearl Paradise, the two great sword immortals temporarily removed their concealment of chi, allowing our eastern Aquarius continent to catch a glimpse, and witness the sword cultivators passing by like a swarm of locusts. Chen Songfeng laughed, Like a swarm of locusts passing by? That's not a good way to put it. Liu Baqiao laughed. So what if it doesn't sound good? Think about it. Is there a more appropriate way to put it? When the swarm of locusts passes by, not even a blade of grass will survive. How imposing. Chen Songfeng hesitated for a moment, but still decided to be honest, and told a secret. Chen Xiong once said that there would be a great battle under that city wall about every 100 years. Liu Baqiao nodded, obviously knowing about this before, so I wanted to contribute, and to say the least, I also had the selfish intention of using the battle to nurture the sword. In the end, the Wind and Thunder Garden quickly sent a letter back to the Flying Sword, and from the Grandmaster to the Master to the senior brother, they all scolded me terribly. Chen Songfeng laughed in schadenfreude. Liu Baqiao suddenly asked, "Is that guy called Chen Pinggan still in the town?" Chen Songfeng shook his head. "No. Now this young man is amazing. It's said that he alone occupies 4 mountains, one of which is called Luopa Mountain, and there's a mountain god that the Dali Imperial Court has just conferred there. He's a real rich man. Don't you have a good impression of him? When you meet again in the future, you can ask him to treat you to wine and meat." Liu Baqiao wiped his mouth and said, "The pickles he brought are really good. I almost died from the saltiness, but I ate delicacies every meal in the capital of Dali. The more I eat, the more I miss the taste of those pickles." Chen Songfeng said angrily, "Try eating pickles every meal, see if you miss the delicacies in the capital of Dali." Liu Baqiao laughed, "Then it's better to eat fish and meat every meal, just some pickles occasionally, or else I'll be sallow and emaciated. If I really see my fairy Sue in the future, I'm afraid I'll scare her. How awkward would that be?" Chen Songfeng asked, "I've never understood, with your family background and cultivation, no matter how outstanding Xinjiang Mountain's Sujiao is, once you put aside the feud between the Wind and Thunder Garden and Xinjiang Mountain, you're a good match for her, right? Why don't you even dare to greet her?" Liu Baqiao thought carefully, "Maybe I'm afraid she won't like me once she sees me." Chen Songfeng was even more puzzled, "But if you and Su Jiao don't even meet, won't she still not like you?" Liu Baqiao turned his head and winked at Chen Songfeng, smiling, "It's different. As long as we don't meet for a day, I'll be filled with anticipation and hope for the next time we meet." Chen Songfeng shook his head, "You're really boring. Aren't you afraid that the next time you meet, you'll be attending Fairy Su Jiao's wedding?" Liu Baqiao felt like he was struck by lightning. He reached out and hugged Chen Songfeng's neck, fiercely saying, "Chen Songfeng, do you want to die? Children's words carry no harm. Children's words carry no harm. God, don't pay attention to this guy. You Lao, don't take it seriously." After crossing the border of Yefu Pass, they would have left Dallas borders. Before reaching the Great Sui Kingdom, they would have to pass through the Great Sui Kingdom's northwest region, which was about 1,200 miles away. Compared to the Great Li City's citizens who liked to speak the Great Li's official language, they were not familiar with the Aquarius continent's official language. On the other hand, the Great Sui and Huangting nation had a stronger literary style. Almost everyone knew how to speak the official language of their own continent. The only difference was the accent. A carriage slowly followed behind a group of people. The coachman was the tall young man Yu Lu. Kui Dong was sleeping in the carriage all day. The young lady thanked him. She had completely integrated into the group of people led by Chen Pinggan, but her relationship with Yu Lu and Kui Dong was becoming more and more distant. She was able to compare notes with Lin Shuyi in chess. Although it was called comparing notes, it was actually crushing. The young lady's strength in chess was extremely strong. She could easily kill dragons. She defeated Lin Shuyi in every game. She could also chat with Li Huai in an unconstrained manner. Together with Li Huai, they used the painted wooden puppets and the 5 clay figurines to arrange the troops and set up the battle formation. The two of them had a lot of fun. The only thing she did not want to talk to was Li Baoping. Of course the latter was the same. Chen Pinggan was polite to her and Yu Lu, but he did not pay attention to the young man in white. Along the way, Kui Dong used all kinds of methods. He threw a tantrum and acted shamelessly. He almost hugged Chen Pinggan's leg and cried. He even tried to use gifts to entice Li Huai and the others, to let the 3 founding fathers help to plead for leniency. He went to Chen Pinggan and asked for his well-being. He tried to reason with him, but he was rejected time and time again. In the end, the young man was flustered and exasperated. It was not that he did not threaten Chen Pinggan, saying that if Chen Pinggan did not accept him as his disciple, he would die together with Chen Pinggan. In the end, Chen Pinggan said, "You can try, you are Kuidong Shan, I am Chen Pinggan, there will only be one tombstone, whoever survives will help to write the other's name." This made the young man in white immediately deflated. He almost suffered internal injuries from holding back his anger. He wanted to slap this guy surnamed Chen to death, but once he had this thought, his palm would be beaten red and swollen by the old scholar's unknown technique, as if he was using a feather duster. As dusk approached, the carriage slowly moved along the mountain road. The young man in white lifted the curtain and sat behind the coachman, Yu Lu, and said loudly, "In front of us is Chen Pinggan, Brother Chen, Uncle Chen, Ancestor Chen. This mountain is called Hengshan, we have to be careful." Before the Huangting Kingdom, this place belonged to the later Shu Kingdom. According to a later Shu scholar's book, Trivial News of the Shu Kingdom, there was a temple of goddess Qing in Hengshan. In front of the temple was an ancient cypress tree of unknown age. Its wishes were very effective, so later generations built the temple. According to legend, a minister of the previous dynasty sacrificed himself for the country. His family fled, only his young daughter refused to leave. She killed herself with a sword, her blood staining the roots of the cypress tree. Her soul then attached itself to the old cypress tree. After that, many strange things happened, but fortunately, all the rumors said that she died a good death, so there is no need to be too nervous. Just treat it as a sightseeing tour with a story. Chen Ping's heart tightened. After the incident with the wedding dress ghost, whenever he heard about ghosts or gods, it was inevitable that he would be afraid of them for the rest of his life. Actually, not only Chen Pinggan, Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi, even that yin spirit, no one dared to let their guard down. Therefore, before dusk covered the mountain ridge, they stopped and chose an empty space on the mountainside as their resting place. After a simple but satisfying dinner, Li Baoping used the light from the bonfire to start flipping through his favorite travel book on mountains and rivers. Usually, Lin Shuyi would not take out the Cloud Gem book in front of Yu Lu and Xie. He would only open the mountain search map given to him by the blind old Taoist and admire those lifelike mountain spirits and ghosts. Li Huai, on the other hand, would continue to fiddle with those little things. Usually, only Xie would be willing to accompany him, and today was no exception. Yu Lu was very strange today. He actually took the initiative to ask to play a game with Lin Shuyi. Naturally, Lin Shuyi would not refuse. In fact, he felt that it was very interesting. Previously, when he sat across from Xie, it was probably because the disparity between their chess skills was too great. It was like a mountain pressing down on him. Although Lin Shuyi controlled his emotions very well, every time after Xie left, the youth would still feel a little depressed when he reviewed the game alone. But when he played chess with Yu Lu, who had a gentle temperament, he found that this tall young man, who was a remnant of the Lu family, played chess in a way that was similar to his temperament. He was gentle and slow, neither did he make any unsightly moves, nor did he have any celestial hands that would make people's eyes light up. He was very steady. After 2 games, Lin Shuyi lost both times. Both times, it seemed like he was only 1 move behind. Both times, before Yu Lu made the last move, the chessboard was still evenly matched, and the outcome was still unclear. When the 2 young men were playing chess, the white-clothed young man Kuidong put his hands behind his back, glanced at the chessboard, rolled his eyes, and did not want to look anymore. But after going around in a circle, he really had no place to go. He could only return to the chessboard again and again, either standing behind Lin Shuyi and rolling his eyes, or standing behind Yu Lu and rolling his eyes. In the end, he really could not take it anymore. He said to Lin Shuyi, who was silently reviewing the game, "Yu Lu, that seemingly loyal little rascal, is purposely walking the dog, can't you see it at all? Do you want to win against Yu Lu and Xie? As long as you have 10% of my power, I guarantee that you can win 10 out of 10 games." Lin Shuyi raised his head and smiled. "Wait until you become Chen Pinggan's student first." But Lin Shuyi could not help but glance at the tall young man who was hiding his strength. The latter gave him a faint smile, his eyes clear. Then he lowered his head, and began tirelessly packing his luggage. The white-clothed young man Kui Dong beat his chest with both hands, his heart aching. In the distance, on a branch of a large tree, there was a young man in straw sandals standing on it. The branch under his feet was pressed into an arc. He lightly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, slowly closed his eyes. Day after day he practiced the sword furnace stance. The mountain wind brushed his face. It was like the mountain was whispering, and the young man was speechless. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.